Everyone at the ball was practically buzzing with curiosity. The biggest question of the night: who would be named Lady of the Year? But before anyone could get their hopes up, a red-haired lady stepped forward and dropped a bit of disappointing news. This year, no young lady would be entering the ballroom escorted by a member of the imperial family. The emperor, empress, and even the crown prince had all been away for years, busy with monster subjugation. Of course, some of the ladies weren't convinced. They started whispering, "What about the master of the magic tower? Wasn't he technically part of the imperial family?" The red-haired lady quickly shut that down. He never attended. Luciel, the so-called disgrace of the imperial family, was infamous for his uncontrollable magical outbursts caused by his magic reflux disorder. Despite holding the title of Archduke, he had been pushed away and confined to the magic tower. Someone like him showing up at a glamorous imperial ball? Yeah, not happening. At least that's what everyone thought. Because right at that exact moment, as if perfectly timed, Luciel walked in. And not only did he show up, he showed up looking drop-dead gorgeous, with a stunning woman by his side. Daphne Peregrine. They immediately stole the room's attention. Daphne greeted everyone politely. Now here's the twist. Daphne wasn't just any noble lady. She was the classic villainess, the exact type you'd expect from a romance novel, which, coincidentally, was exactly what this world used to be for her. Long ago, when a goddess went to war against the devil, 4 heroes followed her. Each represented something powerful: peace, justice, strength, and the last one, a watcher of demons. Daphne was his descendant. The Peregrine family had always been known for producing exceptional talents, either powerful magic users or unmatched sword masters. Everyone, except Daphne, because she had none of it. As if that wasn't enough, her mother died giving birth to her. Her grandfather, crushed by grief, completely ignored her existence. And somewhere along the way, Daphne convinced herself that becoming a saint might be the only way to escape the shame tied to her name. Instead, she became infamous. In the original story, she was known as a spiteful troublemaker, someone who caused chaos wherever she went. Eventually, all of it led to her exile. But that was the original story. Things were different now. Back in the present, Luciel leaned in slightly and murmured that every single eye in the room was on her. Daphne already knew that. That was the whole point of coming. Still, even if this was all part of their plan, being the center of attention wasn't exactly comfortable. Luciel, on the other hand, casually remarked that she seemed more used to it than he was. "Nope, you've got it all wrong." So she pouted a little and reminded him not to get jealous. That made him instantly paused, because he didn't like it. The way people were staring at her, the way their attention lingered, it bothered him. But Daphne simply reminded him of something important. He was her partner tonight. The only reason she could stand here, return to the capital, and face everyone like this, it was all because of him. She thanked him, a real, genuine thank you. Luciel looked like he had just won the lottery. He couldn't even hide the blush on his face. Which of course made Daphne panic a little, immediately asking if he was feeling sick again. But instead, he gently held her hand and confessed that he thought he had fallen for her all over again. Behind them, the ladies squealed in unison, like fans watching their favorite romantic scene unfold. Meanwhile, Daphne was trying to stay grounded. The important thing was that she was still alive. She had survived this far, and somehow returned to the capital with the master of the magic tower, someone who didn't even exist in the original story she read. At this point, it felt like she had dodged death itself. So whether the original heroine would appear or not, she decided she would just enjoy everything while she still could. Soon enough, the two of them found themselves dancing together, moving gently with the music. Luciel asked how she liked her very first imperial ball. Daphne smiled, admitting that it had lived up to her expectations. It was grand, beautiful, almost overwhelming. Hearing that, he stepped a little closer and quietly asked if, in her eyes, he was the most handsome man in the room. On the outside, Daphne kept her calm smile, subtly reminding him that people were watching. But on the inside, she was completely losing. That man's riz game was next level. Still, she found herself smiling softly, thinking about how unique he was. And in a strange way, so was she. But things hadn't always been like this. In her past life, she was just an ordinary girl from South Korea, stuck in a life that never really felt like hers. She grew up under a strict, old-fashioned grandmother who scolded her over every tiny mistake. At home, there was no warmth either. Her father and stepmother barely paid attention to her. So at some point, she made a quiet decision. Once she got a stable job, she was leaving all of it behind. And she actually pulled it off. She worked hard, got into a good college, did well in her studies, and even landed an internship at a major company. Everything was finally lining up. All she had to do now was secure a full-time position and survive the usual company competition. Simple, right? However, the moment she submitted her project to her manager, everything fell apart. The man didn't just steal her work, he flipped the whole situation on her, making her look like the liar instead. And that same night, she received the message. She was fired. With her career falling apart and her family situation already a mess, she ended up drinking her problems away. And that's when it happened. Truck-kun made its grand entrance. Well, it actually deserves an award for sheer consistency. Anyway, she thought that was the end. But instead of darkness, she woke up somewhere else. The first thing she noticed was the room. Elegant furniture, soft lighting, and a massive mirror that definitely didn't belong in any hospital. She was alive, but clearly not where she used to be. Then a maid walked in and gently asked if she was awake. As soon as she responded, a sharp pain struck her chest. She began coughing violently, her throat burning like fire. The maid panicked, rushing to her side and warning her not to speak. The poison hadn't fully left her system yet. Poison? That was already a bad sign. As she tried to steady herself, her eyes caught something in a small mirror nearby. Pink hair. That alone was enough to make her rush to the large mirror, and the moment she saw her reflection, a completely different girl stared back. And then, like a flood breaking through a dam, the memories hit all at once. Daphne Peregrine. A name she recognized immediately. The so-called villainess, blamed for her mother's death simply for being born. The one labeled aggressive, obsessive, and completely unlikable. The same Daphne who was accused of poisoning the saint, and ultimately got arrested for it. In the original story, Daphne had tried to defend herself, insisting she was innocent, that it was actually the saint who seduced her fiancé, Roderick. And right there, it clicked. Those weren't just random memories. This was the story she had read before, which meant she had been reincarnated as Daphne. Unbelievable. Her past life had already been difficult, but this was basically a guaranteed bad ending. And as if things couldn't get worse, the door suddenly opened. A cold, sharp presence entered the room. The man looked at her with clear disappointment and asked how she could dare attempt to take her own life after bringing so much disgrace to the family already. Didn't she feel even a little guilt? From the memories, she recognized him immediately. Laius Peregrine, her uncle on her mother's side. A respected swordsman and scholar at the Imperial Academy, and someone who absolutely despised Daphne. In his eyes, she was the reason his sister had died. So yeah, not exactly the most supportive family member. He continued, his tone cold and unforgiving, saying he'd been a fool to believe she might eventually change. Throwing her life away over heartbreak? Pathetic. Hearing that, she quickly pieced things together. This was that part of the story when Daphne's fiancé cheated on her, and she tried to poison herself. Even back when our girl was just a reader, she had thought it was ridiculous. Why throw everything away for something as fleeting as love? It never made sense to her. Daphne had everything: status, wealth, influence. And yet, she chose that ending. Meanwhile, Laius simply let out a tired sigh as he looked at her. Then, he declared that this would be his last act of kindness. Tossing a small vial of medicine on the floor, he warned her that her punishment would be decided later. From now on, he would no longer tolerate her behavior. She was forbidden from leaving the mansion until the Duke returned. Without another word, he turned around and left her alone. The original Daphne had actually been pretty serious about becoming a saint. She studied herbalism, built her own greenhouse, and even grew medicinal plants herself. So naturally, our Daphne decided to check that place out. Unfortunately, the greenhouse was in terrible condition. Still, she didn't have the luxury to complain. The medicine her uncle gave her had helped, but not completely. The poison was still lingering in her body. If she were the original Daphne, she probably wouldn't have been able to do much about it. But this Daphne, completely different story. Back in her past life, she had worked for 5 years at a Korean medicine clinic as a part-time to support herself through college. She handled customer service, memorized herbs, and even learned how to prepare and apply treatments properly. And by the end of it, she was so good at her job that the clinic director even offered her a full-time position. She only turned it down because she got a better offer from a pharmaceutical company. Thanks to that experience, she could recognize medicinal herbs almost instantly, even without trying. With that in mind, Daphne started searching the greenhouse, looking for anything similar to what she once knew. If she could recreate the right remedy, she might be able to completely cleanse the poison from her body. But just as she was getting focused, she heard children's voices echoing from the hallway. Curious, she stepped out to check. Right then, a boy came running at full speed, laughing as he teased his twin brother about how he'd never become a knight if he stayed that slow. And then crash! He ran straight into her. Daphne looked down and questioned who gave them permission to run around like that. The other boy quickly rushed over to help his brother up, and that's when it clicked. These two are Hermano and Julius Peregrine, her cousins, the twin sons of her uncle Laius. Their situation wasn't exactly great either. Their mother had died shortly after giving birth, and since then, they barely received any affection from their father. In the original story, they eventually met the heroine, the one person who showed them genuine care, and from that point on, they became fiercely loyal to her. But right now, they were just two little troublemakers, calling Daphne a witch. Watching them, Daphne couldn't help but think, so these are the infamous little demons. The way they spoke to her, no respect at all, even though she was technically their older cousin, was a bit annoying. The boys tried to act tough, puffing themselves up, but with the way they were slightly stuttering under her gaze, it wasn't very convincing. If anything, they looked more like scared kittens pretending to be lions. Strangely enough, they reminded her of her own twin brothers from her past life. And maybe that's why. Daphne slowly raised her hand. The twins instantly shut their eyes tight, bracing themselves for a hit. But nothing like that came. Instead, she patted their heads, even giving them a rub like they were, well, actual kids. She decided to let this one slide. Call it aggressive affection. But next time, yeah, they wouldn't be so lucky. Julius immediately turned red, flustered and offended, calling her a witch again and demanding to know why she was touching them. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed Hermano's hand and dragged him away, declaring they were leaving. Watching them stomp off, Daphne couldn't help but smile a little. They were like stubborn, feisty little puppies. Honestly, cuter than she expected. A moment later, she noticed a group of maids rushing through the hallway, clearly searching for the two brothers. So she casually pointed them in the direction the boys had gone. The maids quickly thanked her. But with her usual villainous glare still fully active, they looked more terrified than grateful as they hurried away. Daphne blinked, slightly confused. Was running around like that normal in this household? Shaking off the weird encounter earlier, Daphne went back to the greenhouse and got to work. Using a reference book, she tried to recreate a herbal mixture that could fully neutralize the poison in her body. The result? Let's just say it didn't look very convincing. But at this point, she didn't have much of a choice. Taking a deep breath, she drank it in one go, and surprisingly, it was actually good. Even better, the burning pain in her throat started fading almost instantly. Looks like her past life experience wasn't just for show. But just as she was starting to feel relieved, a woman's voice suddenly rang out behind her. The woman rushed over and hugged her tightly from behind, saying she had been so worried. "Who is this?" The woman cheerfully introduced herself as Floa Charlottaire, claiming to be Daphne's favorite teacher. Well, that already sounded suspicious, and it got worse the more she remembered. Back in the day, the former Empress Hela had actually proposed marriage to Daphne's grandfather, the current Duke Peregrine, and got rejected. And apparently, she never moved on. Even after all these years, she still held a grudge against the Peregrine family. So when Daphne's reputation started going downhill, Hela saw her chance. At a banquet, poison was discovered, and with Daphne's background in herbalism, plus her already bad image, Guess who became the perfect scapegoat? Yep, it's Daphne. Under the excuse of helping her reform, Hela sent Floa, her loyal lackey, into the Peregrine household. On the surface, Floa acted like a caring mentor, but in reality, she was basically there to manipulate Daphne like a puppet. Honestly, some adults really needed better hobbies. Meanwhile, the woman was completely unaware that the person in front of her wasn't the same naive Daphne anymore. She assumed Daphne was just heartbroken over her broken engagement with Roderick and started comforting her in her own way. She said that if Daphne just followed her advice, she could win him back. Her eyes slowly scanned Daphne's face, almost like she was inspecting something. Then she casually said she was glad Daphne's face was still flawless. Her reputation might be ruined, but her beauty? Still perfect. According to her, that was Daphne's only weapon left. Because, men only care about appearances, so she should focus on maintaining that. Daphne just stood there, listening. The woman came all this way, and not once did she ask if she was okay. Instead, she treated her like some kind of object, and worse, tried to dress it up like concern. Daphne had enough. Without hesitation, she slapped Floa's hand away and casually called her grandma, telling her she should take better care of her own appearance instead, since apparently that's what men care about. Floa was completely caught off guard. She demanded to know what nonsense Daphne was talking about, but Daphne just brushed it off, saying she had only just woken up, and her memories were all over the place. Maybe she had mistaken her for her grandmother, who used to give her similar advice. Now here's the thing. Floa wasn't old enough to be called grandma, and she definitely wasn't the type to take that lightly. Her expression twitched, but she couldn't lash out. Not when Daphne clearly looked unwell. If she lost her temper here, she'd only embarrass herself. So instead, she forced a smile and thanked Daphne, through gritted teeth, barely holding it together. Putting on a sweet, innocent face, Daphne suggested they go shopping together. She even mentioned a store that offered family discounts. At this point, Floa probably thought Daphne had completely lost it and was dragging her into this grandmother role. She snapped, just for a second, calling Daphne meddlesome and saying she had no need for such things. But the moment she noticed the maids watching, her tone flipped instantly. Like nothing happened. She calmly said she would report Daphne's recovery to the imperial family and the temple, then advised her to rest since her health was the priority. Daphne smiled sweetly and thanked the kind and caring old lady. Our girl absolutely won that fight, a flawless knockout. Floa left the greenhouse clearly displeased, already deciding she needed to keep a closer eye on this Daphne, because something was definitely off. As soon as she was gone, Daphne stuck out her tongue. But then she paused. Wait, her throat didn't hurt anymore. The medicine had worked, which meant her life was no longer in immediate danger. And now that she had time to think, she needed a plan. Well, the answer felt pretty simple. She could just move to some remote estate, live quietly, and let the Peregrine family forget about her existence. A peaceful life, surrounded by nature, fresh air. No drama, no people bothering her. And with her current reputation, no one would dare come near her anyway. Daphne made her decision. If she was going to live this second life, she'd live it as a rich villainess, on her own terms. Not long after, the scene shifts. The steady click of Daphne's heels echoes through the hallway, followed by a pair of smaller, hurried footsteps trying very hard to keep up behind her. She suddenly stops and turns around. She calmly asks if they need something. Of course, the twins immediately deny it. We're not following you, they insist, because somehow they just happen to be walking in the exact same direction. And then, the two of them bolt toward the library, which, coincidentally, is exactly where Daphne was heading. What an adorable pair of little tsunderes. When they arrive, the library looks straight out of a movie. Huge, elegant, and filled with towering shelves lined neatly in alphabetical order. Daphne is genuinely impressed. Honestly, this is the kind of place people dream about. She's always wanted to sit by a fireplace and read a book like this, so she casually picks one and settles into a seat. Peaceful, quiet, and perfect. Well, almost. Because not even a minute later she feels it. Two very obvious stares. Looking up, she catches the twins watching her and casually asks if they want to read together. Julius immediately shuts that down, insisting they always sit there too. But despite all that attitude, both of them hesitate when Daphne simply gestures to the empty space beside her and says, "There's plenty of room." They sit down anyway. Of course, Julius quickly adds that he's only doing it as a special favor, because he doesn't usually read with other people. Daphne responded as if she were about to document the historical moment in her diary. Then, silence. For a second, she even wondered if they had fallen asleep. But nope, they were actually reading. Daphne glances over and spots Julius holding a book on advanced magic theory. Yeah, definitely his father's son. She can already imagine how scary smart this kid's going to be in the future. Meanwhile, Hermano is completely absorbed in a mythology book. Curious, Daphne leans in a little to see what he's reading, only for him to immediately snap the book shut and hug it like it's top-secret information. Startled, she pulls back and apologizes, explaining she was just curious. Julius casually mentions that it's Hermano's favorite book. So Daphne asks the obvious question. Who's his favorite character? Hermano hesitates for a moment before quietly answering, the hero. Strong, brave. The one who fought alongside the heroine, defeated the demons, and brought peace to the Empire. And as he talks, his eyes start to light up. Not long ago, the twins had seen Daphne win against the undefeated demon. Floa. Back then, she had looked like a hero to them. Hermano admits he once wanted to be like that too. But then, just as quickly, his excitement fades. He mumbles that it's all just a myth anyway. Daphne watches him quietly for a moment. Then, with a small smile, she tells him that if he wants to be a hero, then he already has what it takes. Julius frowns, clearly unconvinced. In his mind, a hero can't exist without a goddess and demons. That's how the story works. Without that, it's impossible. Hermano gets embarrassed and tries to brush it off, saying he was just imagining things. But Daphne doesn't let the mood drop. She reaches over and ruffles Julius's hair, casually teasing that maybe if he does something bad, the goddess might actually show up. And just like that, Julius calls her a witch again. Big mistake, because Daphne immediately plays along, joking that witches are on the demon's side. So if he keeps calling her that, she might just summon one. That's all it takes. Julius panics and literally falls to the floor. Daphne can't help but laugh. Relaxing a bit, she reassures him not to worry. If a demon really does appear, then the goddess would come too. And when that happens, their hero would finally get his moment. Hearing that, Hermano gently reaches out and offers his hand to his brother, promising that if anything happens, he'll be the one to save him. After spending some time in the library, Daphne finally decided it was time to head back. The moment she stood up, the twins did too. But she quickly waved them off, telling them not to worry about her and to just keep reading. Of course, they immediately insisted they were already done. Daphne glanced at them, a little amused. They weren't her real brothers, but honestly, they were far more innocent and unexpectedly sweet. As they walked together, Hermano suddenly spoke up, a bit hesitant. He asked if she would come back to the library again. Daphne answered casually, probably not. With that, his expression dropped. You could almost feel the disappointment as he quietly asked her again. She paused, pretending to think it over, before adding that maybe she would. Just not too often. But on one condition. Julius had to call her by her name. And just like that, Julius exploded, absolutely refusing. No way was he calling a witch by her name. Daphne let out a dramatic sigh, acting as if she were deeply troubled. She said she must be hearing things, because she kept hearing the word witch. Maybe a demon was summoning her. She then turned to Hermano instead, asking if he would call her by her name. The boy hesitated. For a second, Daphne almost laughed, but held it back. Pushed too hard, and they might go right back to hating her. But unexpectedly, Hermano gently tugged on her skirt and softly called her name, asking her to come back to the library again. And so Daphne folded instantly. She agreed and even promised to visit again tomorrow. Just as things were settling, something clicked in her mind. Shouldn't they be in class right now? Hermano awkwardly looked away and admitted he didn't want to go. It was boring, and they already knew everything anyway. Right on cue, 2 servants entered the room. The maid politely asked Daphne for permission to escort the boys to their lessons. The twins immediately resisted, but the maid quickly warned them they would be punished if they didn't attend. Then her gaze shifted slightly toward Daphne, subtle, but definitely suspicious, as if asking whether she had something to do with this. Daphne almost laughed. So now it was her fault. At that, Julius suddenly blurted out that they had been caught hanging out with a witch. The maid stiffened and lightly scolded him, telling him not to call Daphne that. But Julius, being Julius, ignored her completely and whispered to Hermano that next time they should just deal with the witch quickly so they could go to class. But just before leaving, Hermano glanced back at Daphne. For a brief second, their eyes met. And somehow she understood. They were covering for her. Daphne was genuinely amused. For kids their age, that was surprisingly thoughtful. The scene then shifts to a completely different place, the Ilt's shop in the Wayne district. A man slams his fist on the table, furious about the price he's being charged. He starts going off, accusing the shop of running an illegal business, and even threatening to shut it down. At first, the shopkeeper stays polite, calmly saying the price is fair. But the moment the customer pushes it too far, the atmosphere changes completely. The man's friendly expression disappears, and his voice drops cold enough to freeze the room. And so, the customer folds. All that confidence, gone. He immediately backs down, pays up, and rushes out like his life depends on it. The second the door closes, the shopkeeper, Gale, just slumps over the counter, completely drained, mumbling that he seriously needs to quit this job. But suddenly, the door creaks open again. His boss walks in, wearing a cloak, looking way too relaxed for someone running a place like this. Gale starts ranting immediately about the rude customer, then suddenly pauses. When did his boss even get there? The man pulls back his hood, revealing his silver hair. It's Luciel, the Archduke himself. And with perfect timing, he casually mentions he arrived right when Gale was complaining about wanting to quit. Gale instantly starts sweating. Luciel, meanwhile, seems completely unbothered. He explains he just came back from the magic tower because someone begged him to come, saying they were about to die. So he went to check, just to see if they were actually dying. You know, normal things. Then he asks about new orders, and Gale quickly hands over a request. Something about a love potion. It's difficult to make and not really Luciel's area, so he put it on hold. The Archduke simply smiled and said he'd take it, adding that humans were foolish creatures anyway. Sometimes they mistook fear and anxiety for love. And honestly, hanging two people upside down together might work faster than any potion. Well, what else would you expect from someone whose only expertise is chopping off heads? Anyway, Gale brings up some gossip to lighten the mood, mentioning how Daphne tried to take her own life after her engagement fell apart. Luciel just assumes it proves the rumors right, that she's obsessed with love. Gale then carefully asks if his master is leaving for the day. The boss teasingly says no. He has to make sure Gale doesn't actually quit. Confirmed, Gale's definitely not escaping his hellish job anytime soon. Later, once Luciel returns to his room, he checks the sales ledger. That's when he finds out that Laius Peregrine bought medicine for his niece. He finds it ironic. Even if Daphne is seen as pathetic, at least her family still does something for her. But before he can think further, a sharp pain hits his head. Luciel hates using anesthesia herbs, but when it gets this bad, he doesn't have much choice. Right then, Gale enters and drops some news. Daphne Peregrine has requested a meeting. Luciel immediately refuses. But then Gale adds one more thing. She said to tell him not to buy the relic on the black market because it's fake. So in the end, Luciel agrees to meet her. When they finally sit across from each other, he doesn't waste time. He asks how she knows about the relic, and why she's so sure it's fake. Daphne doesn't answer right away. Luciel understands the silent message and offers her some tea. But even then, she doesn't touch it. Instead, she insists that the shop owner should drink first. Which tells him everything. She's done her research on his shop. Meanwhile, our girl is on full alert. Because the man sitting in front of her? He's not just anyone. He's the final villain of the story, the one who stands against the crown prince, and tries to destroy the world. There wasn't much information about him in the novel, but she remembers enough. Enough to know she has to be careful. Still, she tries to calm herself. After all, she survived job interviews in a capitalist society. Compared to that, meeting the mastermind villain shouldn't be so bad. Anyway, Luciel suddenly breaks the silence, assuring her there's nothing in the tea, then drinks it himself. Only then does she relax a little. Afterwards, Daphne pulls out a vial and asks him to confirm if the poison came from his shop. This is one of the reasons she came here in secret. Because from her memories, the original Daphne didn't make the poison herself. Which means someone else gave it to her. Luciel examines the vial carefully, then shakes his head. It's not from his shop, but he has seen something like it before. It's from Assassin's Guild. They use different bottle colors and corks to distinguish clients. And considering how expensive assassination requests are, this was most likely ordered by a high-ranking noble. Daphne's expression hardens. She says she needs to find out who ordered it. But Luciel immediately refuses. He claims he has no ties to the Assassin's Guild and wants nothing to do with it. Daphne doesn't back down. She reminds him that she just saved him from wasting money on a fake relic. Time is money, and a fair deal should go both ways. In truth, she desperately needed his help. If she tried to investigate this alone, she would only end up with a bad ending. And if she sent someone else in her place, her uncle would likely catch them, leading to another bad ending. She had to rely on Luciel and avoid every path that could lead to her death. Besides, in the story, the Mastermind and the Assassin's Guild were closely connected. So if he says he has no connection, yep, that's probably a lie. Thankfully, Luciel eventually agrees, and Daphne can hardly believe it worked. But she doesn't stop there. She pulls out another vial, this time her own antidote, and asks him to analyze it. That's her second reason for coming. At that, Luciel quickly asks if the previous antidote didn't work. When she questions how he knows about it, Luciel simply shows her the order form from Laius. Oh, so her uncle really did go that far for her. Still, Daphne isn't fully convinced of his intentions. The Archduke asks if there was something wrong with the expensive antidote. She calmly says no, it's just that hers is better. Better taste, better smell, and it works instantly. That definitely lands. Now she has his full attention. He even promises to analyze her version thoroughly. Then it's his turn to question her again. How does she know the relic is fake? Daphne makes up a believable excuse, claiming that saints can locate sacred relics, and that she went through hell to become one. In short, she says she investigated black market items herself just to become a saint. But without proof, Luciel assumes she might just want the relic for herself. That's when Daphne admits it. She broke her probation just to come here. And if anyone finds out, she'll either be exiled somewhere remote or forced into a marriage she doesn't want. Either way, her chance to become a saint would be over. This whole thing is a total gamble. Luckily, Luciel agrees to cooperate again. He promises to handle her request within a week and contact her once everything is confirmed. Daphne keeps a calm expression the entire time. But inside, she's celebrating. After their deal was settled, Luciel stood up and, surprisingly, offered his hand to escort Daphne out. She hesitated for a second, but accepted it anyway. I mean, who would have thought? Even the final boss villain has manners. But the moment their hands touched, Luciel flinched. His gaze locked onto hers, sharp and unreadable. For a split second, it almost felt like something big was about to happen. A confession? Nope, not even close. He simply told her to be careful on the stairs because they were steep. That's it. Daphne gave a small smile at the unexpected concern before leaving. The moment she was gone, Gale just stood there, completely confused. Because hold on. This was the same master who hated physical contact. And yet, he personally walked her out? Even agreed to meet her again? Something wasn't adding up. Could it be love? Gale was this close to asking, but before he could even open his mouth, Luciel hit him with a silence spell. Well, his thoughts had been heard loud and clear. However, once Gale could speak again, he immediately asked about the Assassin's Guild and what their cut of the job would be. Luciel immediately warned him to stay quiet unless he wanted another taste of magic. And so Gale instantly covered his mouth. Lesson learned. After a brief pause, Luciel admitted something else. Daphne hadn't tried to die because of love. Someone else had tried to kill her. Of course, Gale wasn't convinced. He insisted everyone already knew how vicious Daphne was. In his mind, she probably made the poison herself and was just trying to shift the blame. But instead of arguing, Luciel simply held up the antidote Daphne had given him. And that's when it clicked for Gale. So that's why he walked her out. Because something about Daphne didn't make sense. The Archduke had a rare ability. He could absorb magic, and in doing so, read people's emotions and thoughts. But with Daphne, nothing at all, which was impossible. Gale was just as shocked, because in that world no one could survive without magic. Luciel couldn't understand it either. Thinking back, everything about her felt off. She didn't act like someone obsessed with love, like the rumors said. On top of that, she negotiated with him as an equal, set conditions without hesitation, and even had the nerve to criticize his own antidote. And strangely enough, he wasn't even annoyed. If anything, there was an unfamiliar feeling lingering within him. What could it be? Glancing at the vial again, Luciel asked Gale if he thought the medicine could actually be better than his. Gale immediately said no. A potion made by a noble lady being better than the master of the magic tower? That sounded more like a joke, or poison. Luciel agreed. Which was exactly why he needed to test it himself, so he drank it. For him, it didn't matter if it was poison. His unstable magic would counter it anyway. Testing dangerous substances on himself was basically routine. But then, his eyes widened. Gale rushed over in panic, already offering his anesthetic herb cigarette. But Luciel stopped him, because he was fine. For as long as he could remember, his magic had always been out of control. Since childhood, it had caused him nothing but pain. The only way to suppress it was through divine power, the complete opposite of magic. But even that didn't work. So after being cast aside to the tower, he started experimenting, creating potions, testing limits, even trying to destroy himself in the process. Because if he died, no one would have cared. And more importantly, he'd finally be free. And now, just from drinking Daphne's antidote, the pain was completely gone. Luciel stared at the vial, unable to hide his shock. How was this even possible? Then his thoughts drifted back to her, the only person whose emotions and thoughts he couldn't read. Maybe, just maybe, she was the one who could cure him. And with that realization, one question lingered in his mind. Who exactly is Daphne? The moment Daphne stepped out of the carriage, a wave of nausea hit her hard. So even in this world, she still gets motion sickness. The maid quickly rushed over and covered her with an umbrella, trying to shield her from the rain. But something else stood out more. No one came to check on her. At this point, it was pretty obvious. This household wasn't exactly big on caring for each other. Daphne quietly reached into her pocket and pulled out a pouch of coins, offering it to the two servants. They immediately refused, insisting they were just doing their jobs. But Daphne told them that even help can come with a price, and gently insisted until they finally accepted it. The two thanked her, clearly touched by her generosity. Then, without making a big deal out of it, Daphne asked to hold the umbrella herself. The maid had already gotten a bit soaked, and she didn't want her to get drenched any further. She even told her to use another umbrella instead. The maid's face turned slightly red as she thanked her again. Meanwhile, Daphne was already thinking ahead. Better to invest in the servants now than deal with problems later. With her current reputation, trusting people blindly wasn't an option. As they walked, the maid mentioned that dinner was ready and asked if she wanted it brought to her room. Daphne agreed, then casually checked her pocket watch. That's when she asked if the children had eaten yet. The maid hesitated, then admitted, probably not. Earlier, she noticed the lights in their study room were still on. Apparently, their tutor, Count Velden, had been speaking on their behalf, saying the boys didn't want their meals, all under the excuse that they were focused on studying. The moment Daphne heard that name, her expression hardened. Mentes Velden is a member of a branch family of House Peregrine, and one of the worst people in the mansion. Honestly, just hearing his name was enough to ruin the mood. Now everything made sense. Why the twins had seemed off earlier. With someone like that as their teacher, no wonder they avoided their lessons. That's why Daphne told the maid to take her to the study room. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Mente stood there, looking down at the twins with clear disdain, openly mocking them. He called them pathetic for not being able to solve such a simple problem and ridiculed their skills, saying their swordsmanship was basic and their knowledge even worse. Julius clenched his fists, trying to hold back, and argued that the task itself didn't make sense. Writing a summary and thesis on advanced magic wasn't something they could just do. But Mentis only sneered. He compared them to their father, saying Laius could already do it at their age. So why couldn't they? Then he went further, saying maybe they took after their late mother. The twins fell silent, their expressions dropped instantly. Exactly what he wanted. Watching them break like that, especially with faces that resembled Laius, was nothing more than entertainment to him. Now, what's the reason behind this man's behavior? It's actually extremely petty. Back in his younger days, he saw himself as a genius, good at both academics and swordsmanship. In his mind, he was destined to become part of the prestigious Peregrine family. But then came Laius. No matter what Mentes did, he could never beat him. Not in skill, not in talent, nothing. And that completely crushed his pride. So since he couldn't go back in time and get his revenge, he found another outlet, the twins who looked just like the man he hated. With a twisted smile, Mentes went even further, saying their late mother probably regretted giving birth to them. That it was a waste. That she died for weaklings. He even implied that Laius himself might feel the same. That the twins were nothing but monsters who took away the woman he loved. That crossed the line. Julius was about to snap back, but Hermano stopped him. Tears welled up in his eyes as he quietly said he didn't want their father to be disappointed. And hearing that, Mentes just smirked in satisfaction. Then he ended the lesson, saying he'd push them even harder tomorrow. But just as he was about to leave, the door slammed open, and Daphne walked in. She casually apologized, saying that when she hears complete nonsense, her body just moves before she can think. The man frowned immediately, asking if she was calling his words nonsense. But Daphne just smirked and walked further in, acting innocent. She said she never mentioned him. So why was he feeling guilty? That landed like a slap. Mentes narrowed his eyes. Daphne and the twins weren't even close, so why was she interfering? Did she hear everything? Because if she reported him to Laius, things would get messy real fast. But then again, this was Daphne, the family's so-called disgrace. Would anyone even believe her? And the twins? They cared too much about their father to speak up. In his mind, this was an easy win. So he straightened up and flipped the situation, accusing Daphne of being disrespectful and disruptive during an important lesson. He even threatened to report everything to Laius himself. Daphne didn't back down. She pointed out that if anyone was acting disgracefully, it was him, for bringing up a dead mother just to hurt children. When Mentes tried to keep control, pretending nothing inappropriate had been said, Daphne casually picked up a teacup and poured it right over his head. The man exploded in anger, demanding to know what she was doing. But Daphne just played dumb, acting like she had no idea what he was talking about. At that moment, something about her expression reminded him of Laius, that same cold, intimidating presence, and it shook him. Still, he tried to threaten her, saying he would report everything and that Laius would never tolerate her behavior. Daphne didn't even blink. She dropped the teacup to the floor, then crushed it under her heel as she told him to make sure to include in his report that she had tried to cut his tongue out, since he loved reporting so much. Her gaze was sharp, cold, and far too convincing. For a second, Mentes genuinely believed she might actually do it. That was enough to make him back off. Stammering out a weak warning, he quickly left the room. Daphne hadn't originally planned to go that far, but insulting a dead mother in front of children wasn't something she could ignore. As soon as he was gone, she turned to the twins, her expression softening, and asked if they were okay. Hermano lowered his head, his voice trembling. He asked why she had helped them, when it was their fault their mother died. The poor boy genuinely believed it, that their father couldn't even look at them because of it. That everything Mentes had said was true. If they had never been born, their mother would still be alive, and their father would be happy. Daphne knelt down in front of him. She told him she didn't need a reason, and more importantly, none of that was true. No matter what happened, no one had the right to hurt children like that. and there was no such thing as someone who shouldn't have been born. Well, maybe with one exception, that man. Then, she gently wiped away his tears and added that when someone was in trouble, a hero always came to save them. And just like that, the twins clung to each other as they cried, slowly finding comfort in one another. A few minutes later, the situation somehow turned into Daphne being completely stuck between the two boys. Both of them were clinging tightly to her dress like their lives depended on it. She let out a small sigh and told them she didn't mind spending time together. But could they please let go of her dress? Julius pouted and immediately asked if she didn't want to stay with them. Daphne quickly clarified that wasn't the problem. It was just a bit uncomfortable. But as she said that, Hermano's expression crumbled again, like he was about to cry. He asked if they were the ones making her uncomfortable. Daphne said that it was absolutely not. The answer came so fast that both boys immediately brightened, their mood flipping just like that. Then, right on cue, both of their stomachs growled loudly. Perfect timing. Daphne casually suggested they have dinner together. She had honestly expected them to act all stubborn again, just so she could tease them a little. But instead, they straight up said yes. She actually felt oddly proud, like a cat owner who had finally been accepted by two very cautious, grumpy kittens. As they started walking out together, the twins noticed the umbrella on the floor and asked if it was hers. And somehow, that simple question turned into a mini battle, because now, both of them wanted to be the one to share the umbrella with her. Daphne sighed, already done with the chaos, and warned them that if they kept arguing, she'd just leave both of them behind. That worked instantly. Both boys backed down like their lives had flashed before their eyes. A very effective parenting technique. Seeing no other choice, Daphne came up with a solution. She'd share the umbrella with both of them. But only if they promised not to fight and to get along from now on. The twins instantly smiled and quickly agreed. Cut to the scene where Floa returns to the estate, already in a bad mood. She immediately starts complaining, snapping at the maid for taking too long, and warning her that if her dress gets wet, she'll be held responsible. The maid quickly apologizes, holding the umbrella higher as Floa walks past. But inside her head, it's even worse. Floa still can't believe what happened earlier. The former empress actually told her she was disappointed, and it was all because of Daphne. She had always been confident that Daphne would follow her instructions like before. But now, not only did Daphne survive the poison, she's becoming unpredictable and harder to control. Her irritation builds as she grits her teeth. She hates everything about Daphne. To her, Daphne is just like her useless mother, Amila, both unable to use magic, both a disgrace to the family name. In her eyes, neither of them ever deserved to stand among the Peregrines. But she quickly calms herself, taking a deep breath. No point staying angry. After all, she has an imaginary beauty to maintain. With a soft sigh, she shifts her focus to something more pleasant, like Lord Laius. A dreamy smile appears on her face as she softly whispers his name, imagining a future where he finally belongs to her. Yep, she's that kind of delusional. Speaking of Laius, Floa suddenly asks the maid about the twins, whether they caused any trouble while she was away. The maid hesitates before answering. Apparently, the boys had refused to attend their lessons again, but eventually went in. That alone is enough to irritate Floa. Because in truth, she's the one who arranged their bully of a tutor, Count Velden. She personally chose him, dismissing others she deemed unworthy, just to ensure the boys received a proper education. When Floa presses further, the maid nervously adds one more detail. Recently, the twins have been spending more time with Daphne. Floa's suspicion locks in. Of course, it's that troublemaker again. Now she's even interfering with the children? Floa immediately asks where Daphne is. The answer surprises her. Daphne is currently having dinner with the twins in the annex dining hall. That alone is shocking. Ever since Amila's death, the family hasn't eaten together there even once. And now suddenly Daphne is sitting there with the twins. Something is definitely going on. What could she be plotting? Just as Floa is about to go check on Daphne, she runs into a completely drenched Count. When she asks what happened, he immediately explodes, venting all his frustration about Daphne and what she did earlier. According to him, he had been holding back, for both the former empress and Floa's sake. But not anymore. He made it clear he wouldn't tolerate it any longer and planned to report everything to the temple. Then he storms off, still fuming. Floa can only stand there, unable to stop him. All she can think about is the former empress's warning. She can't afford to disappoint her again. Her anger toward Daphne only grows stronger. Then, her mood does a complete 180 when a servant reports that Daphne went to the Wayne district earlier that day and even asked for it to be kept secret. Now Floa has exactly what she needs. Even if Daphne claims she went there for something trivial like luxury items, no one would believe her. The Wayne district is infamous for its shady businesses. People will assume the worst, that she has connections with the Assassin's Guild. And with that single piece of information, Floa finally sees her chance. The perfect opportunity to bring Daphne down for good. Meanwhile, back in the dining room, Daphne sat quietly, watching the twins demolish their food like starving wolves. Which, let's be honest, probably wasn't too far off. She told them to slow down, warning they'd choke or get sick if they kept going like that, which of course happened 2 seconds later when one of them started coughing. Daphne quickly reached over and patted his back, trying to help. She couldn't help but smile a little. They must have been really hungry to eat like that. As the rain poured outside, Daphne found herself zoning out for a moment. A warm room, good food, and 2 adorable kids eating beside her. It felt nice. But then reality hit. Once she left for the outskirts, she wouldn't be sitting here with them anymore. For a brief second, she admitted to herself she might actually miss this. Then immediately shook it off. Survival plan first, feelings later. Julius suddenly looked up at her, shyly asking if she was okay. Daphne quickly assured him she was fine, then smoothly changed the topic by asking Hermano if the food tasted good. The boy shyly corrected her, subtly hinting she should use his nickname instead. And so, Daphne unlocked a new level of closeness with the twins. As they continued eating, something began to bother her. She had never once seen Laius eat with his own children. Which didn't make sense. Even in the original story, he cared about them deeply. Maybe he's just terrible at showing it. Probably emotionally constipated level terrible. No wonder the kids couldn't even tell him about their tutor's abuses. Frustrated, Daphne grabbed her glass and drank it in one go. At that exact moment, Julia started coughing again from eating too fast. She quickly handed him her glass. Meanwhile, Laius was already on the move, and let's just say, he wasn't coming in calmly. Earlier, Floa had filled his ears with her version of the story, painting Daphne as the villainess, someone who humiliated Mentis, drove him away, and was now getting too close to the twins. Of course, she didn't forget to mention the Wayne district, that shady corner of town. So now, in her uncle's mind, everything lined up in the worst way possible. Laius didn't waste a second. He stormed straight into the dining room. And the moment he saw Daphne handing her drink to Julius, his instincts kicked in. He snatched the glass, checking the boy carefully for signs of discomfort. Daphne didn't even speak, and he'd already jumped to the worst-case scenario. She might have poisoned the boy. Wow, his brain ran through that in seconds. Talk about overachieving. Soon after, the twins were escorted out, leaving Daphne and Laius alone in tense silence. Then he brought up the incident with Mentis. Since her uncle probably wouldn't listen to reasoning anyway, Daphne didn't argue. She admitted it. And instead of explaining herself, she picked up her glass and drank. Laius tried to stop her, but it's too late. And of course, nothing happened. After that, Daphne asked him if it was really that shocking for her to drink water, or if he truly believed she would poison the children. She understood his suspicion, but if she let it go, she'd be doubted forever. And more importantly, she hadn't done anything wrong. She explained plainly. Julius was choking. She gave him water. That's it. And if it had been poisoned, she'd have collapsed first. Then she looked him straight in the eyes before asking, "If I say I stepped in to protect the children, would you even believe me?" Out in the hallway, the situation wasn't any easier. The old butler guided the twins back to their rooms, reminding them their father was troubled enough. The boys understood. They always did. That's why they endured everything their wicked tutor said. But this time felt different. Daphne had done nothing wrong. She was the first person who actually treated them with kindness, who made them feel safe. So what now? Were they really going to leave her alone just because their father was upset? The twins looked at each other and nodded, then walked back into the dining room like tiny heroes charging into battle. They rushed to Daphne and stood in front of her, shielding her as they pleaded with their father, saying Daphne wasn't bad. In fact, she had only helped them. Daphne blinked, genuinely caught off guard. In the original story, this never happened. They never stood up to their father, not until they met the heroine. Hermano's voice shook as he finally revealed the truth. It was their tutor who tormented them, bringing up their mother, calling them useless, saying they should never have been born. They tried to hold back their tears, but the pain was clear. Daphne gently placed her hand on Hermano's shoulder. He didn't need to push himself further. Just speaking up was enough. The twins clung to her, quietly crying, while Laius stood there watching. Soon his voice dropped, cold and terrifying, as he asked if Mentes really harm his children. At that moment, Daphne finally got it. Laius hadn't been angry with her all those times he seemed cold. This, what she was witnessing now, was what he looked like when truly furious. It didn't take long for things to catch up to Mentes. Within just a few days, he went from acting all high and mighty to sitting behind cold prison bars. And even then, he still wouldn't shut up. The man kept insisting he had done nothing wrong, claiming he never harmed the twins and had no reason to be locked up. On top of that, he even tried to pull rank, reminding everyone he was a count, and that the Peregrine family had no right to imprison him. According to him, this was basically the same as declaring territorial war against the imperial family. But his nonstop complaining finally stopped, the moment the heavy door creaked open. A cloaked figure stepped inside. Mentes immediately perked up. Someone from the imperial palace? When the figure offered him a glass, he didn't hesitate. Thinking it was water, he grabbed it and downed it in one go. Desperate, he even asked for more, saying he hadn't had anything to eat or drink for days. Then the figure removed the hood. It was Daphne. Smiling, she casually remarked how strange it was, since she had specifically brought the largest cup just for him. The Count's face twisted in horror. Of course, Daphne claimed she came out of concern. But yeah, no one was buying that, especially not Mentes. The moment his eyes dropped to the empty glass in his hand, a terrible realization hit him. Amused, Daphne said she wanted to test a new potion on him. After all, he'd be dead soon anyway. Compared to what he had done to those children, this was nothing. Panic took over instantly. He clutched his throat, gasping and begging for help. Before dramatically collapsing to the floor, Daphne just looked down at him, unimpressed. Pathetic. Because in reality, what she gave him was just water, with pure psychological damage. She could have gone further, but she didn't want to cross that line and become a real criminal. So instead, she chose something else, breaking his already fragile mind. Though even that didn't feel like enough. People like him deserved worse. Still muttering to herself, Daphne turned to leave, only to freeze when she saw Laius standing there. How long had he been watching? From his perspective, it probably looked like she had just poisoned a man. Or worse, like some unhinged villainess with very questionable hobbies, and a worrying interest in cutting people. At this point, her imagination was already spiraling, headline after headline flashing in her mind. She opened her mouth to explain, but Laius simply turned and walked away. Wait, that's it? Daphne hurried after him, pointing out that she had just come from the Count's cell. Shouldn't he check on him? Laius only glanced back and told her to follow him to his study. Moments later, Daphne stopped at the doorway, already bracing herself for another round of lecture. Then her eyes landed on a journal resting on the table. Laius explained it had been found in Count Velden's estate. It was his diary. Curious, Daphne picked it up and flipped through the pages. And the more she read, the clearer everything became. She already knew Mentes hated Laius. But this was something else. A twisted, obsessive hatred, born from deep jealousy, eventually taken out on the twins. Laius then admitted that all this time, he believed he was doing the right thing. He had been taught to stay firm, never let emotions interfere, never show weakness. because the moment he did, it would create openings for enemies. So he kept his distance, thinking his children would understand. But the truth? He never once truly looked at them, and because of that, he failed to see their pain. He also apologized to Daphne, admitting he was wrong to doubt her, and that he should have answered her properly when she asked if he would believe her. Daphne just stood there, stunned. She had never heard him speak like this before. But instead of accepting the apology easily, she asked for a reward. Laius agreed immediately, even offering to help her marry Roderick Evans if she still wanted it. And at that exact same moment, Daphne made her request. She wanted him to have dinner with the twins at least 3 times a week. Both of them paused. Clearly, they were not on the same page. Daphne wanting to marry Roderick? Hell no. To clear things up, she quickly explained she had already moved on. That what she felt before wasn't love. It was just a foolish obsession. Nearly dying had given her plenty of time for self-reflection. With a calm, almost angelic smile, she added that she regretted everything she had done. She was even ready to give up her dream of becoming a saint. Now, she just wanted to live for herself. Laius didn't respond right away. He simply stared at her. So Daphne doubled down. She had zero interest in Roderick. Then she changed the subject and asked if he truly blamed his children for his wife's death. Laius answered immediately and said no. Losing his wife was painful, but it was never their fault. Hearing that, Daphne pointed out the truth. The twins had always blamed themselves, because they didn't know how their father felt. All this time, they had believed the opposite, and if Laius kept his distance, those misunderstandings would never disappear. Someone had to take the first step, and it had to be him. Laius agreed, and even promised to do as she said. But on one condition, Daphne had to join them. That caught her off guard. She hesitated, saying it would be strange. Laius simply looked at her, confused, asking why it would feel strange to eat with them, when she was family. Simple as that. For a moment, Daphne was speechless. She had always believed she was never truly acknowledged as part of the family. But maybe, even the original Daphne had misunderstood everything. So she nodded, and a family dinner was finally set. But before Laius could leave, Daphne remembered something about the Wayne district. She asked how he had found out about her visit. Laius clarified that Floa had informed him after hearing it from a servant. The same servant Daphne had paid to keep quiet. Internally, she was absolutely fuming. But outwardly, she remained calm, and explained she had only gone there to get medicine since she hadn't fully recovered. Of course, she didn't tell him everything, but she did mention how she found out where he had gotten her antidote. Laius cleared his throat, a bit awkward this time. He admitted that when she was unconscious, nothing worked, not even the temple's purification. So he had no choice but to turn to the black market. That alone was surprising, especially since the Peregrine family and the temple weren't exactly on good terms. Still, he warned her not to do something so reckless again. Daphne smiled and promised she wouldn't. Then he mentioned he would clear things up with Floa to avoid any misunderstandings. And that's when alarm bells rang in Daphne's head. She immediately stopped him and pointed to the journal, mentioning how Mentes frequently visited the temple under the excuse of healing, and who worked closely with nobles there. It was also Floa. So putting 2 and 2 together, was it really possible she knew nothing? Laius's expression turned cold once again, as he promised to handle everything thoroughly this time. As for Daphne, she wasn't even completely sure if Floa was involved. But it didn't matter. Floa made her move and struck first. And now, Daphne was more than ready to return the favor. Meanwhile, Floa asked a maid how everything was going. The moment she heard that Laius and Daphne weren't getting along, she waved the maid off like it was nothing. To her, that was great news. Daphne getting into trouble again? Perfect. Or so she thought. That said, even she wasn't pleased about Mentes. The tutor she personally brought in had gone a little too far. That wasn't exactly part of her plan. Since she had no idea Laius already knew about her connection to him, Floa still believed she had the upper hand. So instead of backing down, she decided to move forward with her plan to completely get rid of Daphne. Right on cue, A maid informed her that Laius was looking for her. Floa immediately lit up, only for her smile to disappear the moment he spoke. He told her to stay out of the children's education. Of course, she protested right away, asking why. Laius explained that recent events had made him reconsider how things were being handled. But that wasn't enough for her. She pushed back harder, saying she had devoted herself to taking care of both Daphne and the twins, only to be cast aside like this. She even brought up the imperial family, reminding him she had been sent by the former empress, basically pulling the "you can't fire me" card. But Laius wasn't having it. He slammed his hand down and made it clear. He already knew that, and that was exactly why he wasn't dismissing her entirely. She could stay, but she would no longer have anything to do with the children's education. That hit harder than being fired, because for Floa, losing that role meant losing control. Still, she tried one last time, asking him to reconsider. Laius's tone turned cold. He said he wouldn't repeat himself, and if she couldn't leave on her own, he'd have the knights escort her out. With no other choice, Floa backed down, but confusion lingered. How had things flipped this fast? Just moments ago, she thought she had everything under control, and now Laius was pushing her away. If this continued, not only would her plans fail, the former empress would never forgive her. And somehow it all traced back to Daphne. It always did. But if her first plan failed, then she'd simply make a new one that would win back Laius's trust, even if it meant risking 2 lives. 4 days later, we find Daphne in her greenhouse, casually poking at her plants like a proud plant mom. After everything that happened, things were finally starting to look up. The twins were smiling again. The biggest walking headache, Mentis, was gone, and completely lost his mind, by the way. And for once, the house didn't feel suffocating. Well, except for one thing. Floa had been way too quiet lately, and let's be real, that's never a good sign. Still, Daphne decided not to stress over it for now. Instead, she focused on her plants. The seeds she planted were growing nicely, and there was a good mix of herbs too. Things were looking promising, until she noticed something weird. White, slippery stuff clinging to the leaves. Not exactly appetizing. Her maid, Sukia, explained that it was something called Fortipo extract, apparently very healthy, especially for kids. It helps prevent colds and even boosts growth. Sounds amazing, right? There's just one tiny problem. It looks like literal snot. No wonder kids hate it. And that's when Daphne had a light bulb moment. What if, instead of forcing kids to eat something that looked like that, she turned it into something they'd actually want to eat? We shifted back to the library. It was basically Daphne's second home, along with her 2 permanent little shadows. Julius, as expected, immediately put on his serious scholar act, insisting they weren't there to hang out and that he absolutely couldn't slack off on his studies. Daphne glanced at his book. Yep, another one of those ridiculously advanced magic theory texts, the kind that made normal people give up after 1 page. She raised a brow and teased him, asking if he actually understood any of it. Julius, of course, doubled down. He insisted he did, because Mr. Benit had taught him before. He even opened the book wide, like he was ready to prove it. Unfortunately, the doodles inside were doing all the talking. Let's just say, he might have wanted to master spelling mentor correctly before tackling advanced magic theory. Instead of laughing, Daphne gently told him that even adults messed up sometimes, just to save what was left of his little pride. Meanwhile, Hermano had been quietly watching the whole exchange. Then, out of nowhere, he asked the real question. Since when had Daphne become this smart? Both twins, brutally honest as ever, agreed she used to be pretty dumb. Daphne took it like a pro, teasing them back and claiming her sudden genius was a top secret. Naturally, that only made them more curious. So she pulled out a small pouch and said that it was her secret. Inside were suspicious-looking candies. Julius immediately looked like he was about to file a formal complaint, but the moment Daphne threatened to eat them all herself, both boys instantly caved and grabbed one. Hermano loved it immediately. Julius, on the other hand, got hit with a full-on sour shock. Seeing that, Daphne was internally celebrating her success. She had just turned medicine into candy. In a world where medicine tasted awful and came in powder form, this was basically revolutionary. Easy to eat, good texture, and actually tasted nice. Daphne was already planning her future at this point. Business empire, early retirement, peaceful life secured. When Hermano asked what it was called, she paused for a moment before answering. 40. Of course, the boys immediately asked for more, and Daphne happily agreed. Free testers secured. Then her attention shifted to Hermano's book. He had been staring at the same page for a while now, clearly stuck on a complicated magic circle. Instead of explaining it herself, Daphne suggested something unexpected. Why not ask Laius? Hermano blinked, like she had just read his mind. He had thought about it, but it was obvious he was still hesitant to approach his father. Daphne gently reassured him, ruffling his hair and telling him his father would probably love that. And just like that, Julius jumped in, because there was no way he was letting his brother go alone. So in the end, the three of them headed off together to Laius's office. As for Laius, he had been buried in work, cleaning up the mess Mentes caused while making sure things didn't escalate into something as serious as a territorial conflict. And now, he still had to deal with the aftermath of Mentes' sudden disappearance in public. Not exactly a relaxing week for him. But at the very least, there was one thing he could be sure of. His sons wouldn't suffer from the Count's torment again. There was just one small problem with the family meal they had recently. Let's just say, it was more stiff than heartwarming. The kind where everyone eats quietly and pretends the tension doesn't exist. At this point, Laius was seriously considering canceling the whole family dinner idea altogether. Just then, Daphne suddenly peeked into his office, almost like she sensed the timing was perfect. So Laius brought it up. He suggested they stop having meals together, thinking the boys were only forcing themselves and probably felt uncomfortable around him. Wrong move, because Daphne slowly pushed the door open wider. In surprise, the twins were there, and they heard him loud and clear. Daphne awkwardly explained that they had been studying and came because they had questions about magic. But since the boys heard what Laius said, they immediately misunderstood. Thinking they were the problem, they apologized and turned to leave. Fortunately, this time Laius didn't let it slip by. He finally stepped forward and cleared things up. He told them it was all a misunderstanding, that he didn't hate them. If anything, he cared too much, which was exactly why he worried. And more than that, he was actually happy they came to see him. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached out. The twins looked like they were having a hard time holding back their tears as they walked closer. After that, Laius noticed something written in the book they brought. It was about one of them dreaming of becoming a great magic swordsman, just like him. Without another word, Laius pulled them into a hug. And just like that, years of misunderstanding began to melt away. A few days later, the change was obvious. The awkwardness was totally gone. Now the twins and Laius were actually talking like a real family. And watching all of this unfold, Daphne couldn't help but feel satisfied. This was exactly what she wanted. A normal, healthy family dynamic. Who knew she'd end up playing therapist in another world? But just as things were settling down, a maid arrived with a letter saying that the cake she ordered was ready. Cake? Daphne didn't order anything like that. Her confusion quickly melted away when she realized that cake was definitely coming from a certain Mastermind villain. Looks like someone's calling. She turned to her uncle and asked for permission to step out, promising she wouldn't cause any trouble. Just a small personal errand. Laius, still in full protective mode, immediately offered to replace their family baker if she wasn't satisfied. Wrong cake, sir. Daphne awkwardly brushed it off, saying she had just ordered something specific to try. Suspicious, Hermano asked if she was going to see Roderick again. At this point, Daphne was this close to losing it. Why did everyone keep bringing that trash up? She didn't even know where to begin correcting that misunderstanding anymore. Eventually, Laius allowed her to go, reminding her to return before sunset, which instantly brought a smile to her face. Later on, Daphne visited that shady little shop in the Wayne district, and as expected, Luciel greeted her warmly, saying he was glad she made it. Daphne immediately smirked and called him out. It sounded like he hadn't expected her to show up at all. Luciel didn't deny it, but internally he was already impressed. She had understood his coded message right away. Definitely not what you'd expect from someone rumored to be a fool. Without wasting time, he slid over the information she had requested. The poison? Confirmed. It had been commissioned through the Assassin's Guild. But the client was already dead. Daphne had already expected that. Whoever truly orchestrated everything wasn't some random person. It had to be someone powerful enough to erase their tracks. Then they moved on to her antidote. Lucielle admitted it honestly. Her potion was astonishing. Even the temple wouldn't be able to recreate something like that easily. If sold, it could fetch an incredibly high price. But there was one major problem: her name. No one was going to trust medicine made by the Empire's most infamous villainess. He quickly clarified that he wasn't trying to insult her. It was just reality. Medicine relied heavily on trust. And right now, Daphne didn't have that. So he asked who she planned to sell it through. Lucielle knew the temple was out of the question, since they wouldn't accept medicine from the magic-using Peregrine family. And independent pharmacists, who didn't want to fall out of favor with the temple, would refuse as well. Which left only one option: his shop, the black market apothecary. And that had been his goal all along. Securing her medicine would have been a huge advantage for him, so he offered his help, trying to take control of the negotiation. Unexpectedly, Daphne declined. Daphne already knew the black market would be easier, but she didn't want to take that route. If something went wrong, she'd be the one facing the consequences. So she decided to look for an independent pharmacist instead. Trying to recover, he offered another solution. He would find her a list of pharmacists who weren't on good terms with the temple, people who might actually be willing to work with her. This time Daphne agreed. A simple deal. She would come back once he had the list ready. After that, Lucielle offered to escort her out and asked if she was heading straight home. Daphne said she planned to stop by the market first. She wanted to check things herself, maybe even find someone on her own. And just to be clear, she added that she wasn't doubting him. She just wanted options. Lucielle said he understood, but internally he felt irritated. No matter what he suggested, Daphne kept setting boundaries. And the worst, he still couldn't read her emotions at all. For someone like him, that was frustrating. But the real question was, why did it bother him this much? Once she left, Lucielle turned to Gale and asked if he knew anyone more suitable than him to be Daphne's business partner. Gale didn't even need to think twice. His boss's ego had definitely taken a hit. So when Gale asked what he planned to do next, Lucielle simply smiled, already plotting. This time, he said, he would approach her using his handsome face and looked forward to seeing her reaction. At the same time, Daphne finally let out a long sigh. The whole meeting had her on edge the entire time. I mean, she had just been casually talking to a potential world-ending villain. Of course she was stressed. Right then and there, she made a firm decision. No matter what happens, she was not getting involved with that man again. Not for business, not for favors, not even by accident. She was going to handle everything on her own. Anyway, Daphne wandered around the market and soon spotted a shop filled with colorful potion bottles. The shopkeeper greeted her a little too enthusiastically, complete with heart-shaped hand signs like he was selling romance instead of medicine. Naturally, he started advertising his products right away, claiming he sold everything from basic healing potions to high-end ones approved by the temple. Daphne picked one up and asked for the price. He said it was a very rare and high-quality potion, cost 20 gold, adding she should buy it now before it's gone. She obviously knew it was overpriced, but since he kept mentioning the temple, she figured there was no point trying to negotiate with someone like him, so she simply decided to walk away. But just as she turned, a large man suddenly appeared beside her, so quietly it was almost creepy. He picked up the same potion, and this time the shopkeeper said it was 50 gold. Now, she really wasn't planning to get involved, but when the man casually agreed to buy it anyway, she just couldn't let it slide. So Daphne stepped in and called the merchant out, pointing out how the price magically increased depending on the customer. Smooth scam, but not smooth enough. The merchant tried to argue back, acting like she didn't understand how pricing worked. But Daphne flipped it on him, questioning whether the temple actually allowed this kind of flexible pricing. With that, the man started to crack. When he got angry and tried to lash out, Daphne didn't even hesitate. She shoved him back and dropped her usual intimidating tone. His survival instincts kicked in fast the moment he realized who he was dealing with, and he apologized instantly. Instead of pushing further, Daphne just walked away. At that point, the crowd had already turned on the merchant anyway, and things were about to get messy. Then her attention shifted to the poor guy who almost got scammed. He was just standing there, completely lost in the chaos. So Daphne grabbed him and pulled him away before things escalated even more. By the time they stopped running, Daphne was out of breath. The man, on the other hand, simply smiled and thanked her sincerely. She shot him a quick warning about being more careful, especially when money was involved. The world wasn't kind to clueless people. Then he removed his hood. Standing there was someone impossibly beautiful, like a literal angel, a face that made her question reality for a full heartbeat. Silver hair glinted in the light, and his red eyes, well, she immediately recognized him. Well, sort of. In her mind, Luciel had always been a minor side character from the story. The Crown Prince's half-brother, exiled to the Magic Tower, destined to die from some rare illness. Naturally, she hadn't connected the dots. She had no idea this was the same mastermind villain she had vowed to avoid at all costs. Luciel's calm, unassuming voice broke her thoughts. He asked if she was all right. Just looking at him made her heart pound. He was the most beautiful person she had ever seen, but somehow completely naive. Daphne snapped herself out of it, literally. A quick slap to her cheeks, and she was back to acting normal, as if nothing had happened. They introduced themselves, and to her surprise, Luciel didn't flinch at her name. No disgust, no judgment, just a polite, warm smile. Daphne kept her guard up. Even if he was a side character, he was still connected to the main story, and to people she definitely wanted nothing to do with. She tried to leave. Of course, Luciel wasn't about to let that happen. With that angelic, irresistible face, he insisted on properly repaying her for helping him. But Daphne refused politely, not just once, but twice. He couldn't help but feel a mix of disappointment and disbelief. Here was a man who could get anything he wanted, being rejected by her again and again. At that exact moment, a familiar man walked straight toward them, and Daphne instantly felt nervous, as if her body reacted to him on instinct. It was Roderick Evans. In the original story, this man wasn't just some random ex. He was the Saintess's second love interest. And unfortunately, someone the original Daphne used to be completely obsessed with. Just thinking about it sent a chill down her spine. Roderick had heard she was seriously ill, but seeing her now, looking perfectly fine, he immediately assumed she had gone back to following him around again after recovering. Daphne, on the other hand, couldn't care less about him. She was just tired that no matter what she did, this man kept popping up in her life. The delusional man went on, saying that no matter how much Daphne clung to him, he had no intention of continuing their engagement. She bluntly told him she felt exactly the same way, and that she didn't want to marry him either, since she was no longer in love with him. But Roderick? Oh, he didn't buy it for a second. He was convinced she was only saying that because she got caught stalking him. Completely unfazed, Daphne added that people could change their minds, just like how he had shared such intense emotions with another woman despite being engaged to her. So her feelings for him? They simply disappeared like smoke too. When Roderick insisted it was all just a misunderstanding, Daphne didn't let him finish his old excuse. She even called him out, asking if he realized how ridiculous he was acting. At that point, Luciel lost it and started laughing out loud. Only then did Roderick finally notice him, and immediately demanded to know who he was. Now he was accusing Daphne of saying strange things just because she had found a new man. Just then, Luciel leaned in and quietly offered to help, saying it was his chance to return a favor. Daphne gave him a small nod, and then things got very dramatic. Luciel dropped to one knee, gently took her hand, and kissed it like something straight out of a fairy tale. He even said he had been looking forward to seeing her all day. Roderick instantly recognized who he was, and now he was panicking. Luciel casually greeted him like nothing had happened, while Roderick immediately switched attitudes, bowing and apologizing for everything he had just said. The Archduke commented that what Roderick said wasn't entirely wrong, then boldly declared his own interest in Daphne. He also took that opportunity to smoothly walk away from Roderick, saying he wanted to be alone with her. Daphne mentally slapped herself when she realized this whole thing was a setup, a perfect way to get rid of Roderick. Turning around, she could see how Roderick's pride had been completely crushed, but because of this, he wouldn't dare go around telling anyone what had happened. And even if he did, no one would believe that the so-called villainess had been with the Archduke that day. So Daphne delivered the final blow. She told him she hoped they would never see each other again, and walked away. Roderick just stood there, watching the two of them leave. When his subordinate tried to check on him, he snapped, yanking his hand away in frustration. That was when his mind drifted back to when he first met Daphne. It was the day the temple developed a new powerful pain reliever. While everyone else enjoyed the celebration, young Roderick had been bored. So when he noticed something glowing near the goddess's spring, he immediately went to check it out, only to find a pink-haired girl lying on the ground. At first, he thought she was already dead, so he tried to leave, not wanting to get involved. But when he heard her coughing, he rushed back to check on her. Oddly, the little girl said something about him calling her there. Soon after, his father arrived and dragged him away. A monster that had been held for purification had escaped. Roderick simply followed his father, while Daphne was left behind with the maids. A few days later, Daphne showed up again to thank him, believing he was the one who had saved her when she fell into the lake. Looking at her more closely, Roderick found himself admiring her pretty face, though he couldn't help but think it would have been better if she didn't have commoner blood. Thanks to Daphne's rather aggressive advances, and the unparalleled influence of the Peregrine family, the two of them eventually became engaged. Her obsession with him was practically madness, which Roderick took as proof that she would never let him go, no matter what. And now, she was saying she didn't love him anymore? He couldn't even understand when she had gotten so close to the Archduke. With that in mind, Roderick rushed forward to grab Daphne, only to be stopped by the Archduke instead. Despite the smile on his face, Luciel's tone was cold as he remarked that Roderick seemed a little slow at assessing the situation. Leaning in, he then whispered the undeniable truth. Roderick had already been dumped by Daphne, and that completely froze him in place. Moments later, Daphne gave Luciel a polite thank you. Honestly, if he hadn't stepped in earlier, that whole situation with Roderick could have dragged on forever. But right after that, she also made one thing clear. It would be better if he didn't get involved with her anymore. After all, she was that Daphne, the infamous one. Luciel, on the other hand, seemed confused. He simply explained that he thought helping her was the right thing to do. And so, Daphne assumed that he probably didn't even know about her reputation. If anything, without his help earlier, she might have ended up being labeled as some unstable noble lady spiraling out after a broken engagement, someone who turned to using slaves and indulging in a wild lifestyle. And yet, here he was, innocently asking if he had done anything wrong. So she corrected him, explaining that she was actually the one who asked for help, and even admitted she felt a little guilty for dragging him into it. Hearing this, Luciel's whole mood lit up. It was like watching a puppy that just got praised from his master. The shift was so obvious, she couldn't help but let out a small laugh. That in turn made Luciel pause. Meanwhile, Daphne immediately overthought it, wondering if her usual villainous face had scared him again. Anyway, priorities. She still had to officially end her engagement with Roderick, and she wanted that done as soon as possible. But just as she was about to move on, Luciel suddenly reached out and gently intertwined their fingers, murmuring that she had a familiar, sweet scent. And this was the same guy who had looked shy just moments ago. And now he was doing this? Daphne was completely thrown off, but instead of overthinking it, she quickly scolded herself. He was just an innocent guy, definitely not dangerous to her heart at all. As for the sweet scent, Daphne assumed he meant the candies she had. So she casually offered him one, and even ate one herself first, just to prove it wasn't poisoned. Meanwhile, Luciel, internally questioning his entire existence, was basically like, Did I just lose to a piece of candy? Because apparently his very handsome face was having zero effect on her. Daphne, of course, heard none of that. So in the end, he just smiled and accepted the candy like a normal person, saying it looked good. After checking the time, Daphne excused herself, saying she needed to stop by a bakery before everything sold out. She even reassured him that if he was worried about rumors, she could easily clear things up and tell people there was nothing going on between them. Luciel quickly told her not to bother. Then he recommended a bakery near the fountain, saying their desserts were really good. As soon as Daphne left, Luciel called out to Gale, complaining that his laugh was practically piercing his ears. Of course, Gale immediately apologized like his life depended on it. But Luciel wasn't really focused on Gale. His mind was still on Daphne. She had clearly said she moved on from Roderick, and judging by her reactions, it seemed true. But what really bothered him was something else entirely. She wasn't affected by him at all. That was strange, because in his entire life, no one had ever been immune to his good looks. So now, for the first time, Luciel found himself genuinely confused. Was there something wrong with him? Naturally, he asked Gale. Things only got worse when Gale, whether out of bravery or sheer foolishness, hinted that maybe the problem wasn't Luciel's looks, but his personality. Good luck keeping your neck intact, Gale. Later that day, Luciel was back in his room, quietly staring at the candy Daphne had given him. A faint smile slowly formed on his lips. Because that candy pulled him back to an old memory, one he had always brushed off as nothing more than a dream. Back then, while everyone else was enjoying a grand celebration, young Luciel had been locked away alone in a cell. And then a little girl appeared. She saw him, assumed he was sick, and handed him a piece of candy. She told him it was sweet, that it would make him feel better, even just for a moment. At the time, it felt unreal, too kind to be true. So he convinced himself it never really happened. But after seeing Daphne smile like that earlier, he realized something. That memory wasn't a dream. It was real. And that realization only made him even more curious about her. There was that strange, sweet scent, and the antidote she had created that instantly eased his headache. Piece by piece, Daphne was becoming impossible to ignore. In the end, Luciel reached a simple conclusion. He needed to know more about her, and the easiest way to do that was to get closer to her. Not long after Daphne returned to the estate, her personal maid hurried in with news. Someone had arrived earlier. A young master. Daphne didn't need a second guess. That could only be Cian Peregrine, her uncle Laius's younger brother. Unlike Laius, Cian had a reputation for being genuinely kind, thoughtful, and patient. The type who kept trying, no matter how cold the family became, hoping one day they'd feel like a real family again. Of course, no one, not even Daphne, knew what truly lay behind that kindness. Then footsteps. Daphne turned just in time to see Cian's wife enter. Livnal Peregrine. Gentle, soft-spoken, and endlessly warm, even towards someone like Daphne, who the world insisted on calling a villainess. And yet, in the original story, Livnal meets a cruel end. She loses her child to miscarriage. And not long after, her life. Her husband, unable to bear it, follows her in despair. Knowing that makes this moment unbearable. Watching someone so kind, while knowing exactly how her story ends, and being unable to stop it. Livnal offered an apologetic smile, explaining they had come as quickly as they could. The message had reached her late at the infirmary, and her condition had slowed them down. Daphne couldn't wrap her head around it. Why was this woman being so nice to her? Livnal's eyes softened as she spoke, relieved to see Daphne safe and well. She hesitated, almost shyly, before asking if she might visit from time to time while staying at the estate. She didn't want to impose, of course. That request stirred a memory. In the original story, Daphne had rejected her outright. She really did have quite the temper back then. So instead of pushing her away, Daphne awkwardly invited Livnal to share some desserts. She added that she'd bought too many earlier, and didn't exactly have friends to share them with. Painfully honest, but smooth. Livnal brightened immediately, happily agreeing. She even offered to prepare some tea she had brought from the infirmary. Daphne knew she couldn't rewrite fate overnight. Livnell's tragedy still loomed somewhere ahead. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to sit still and do nothing. Moments later, the two sat together, quietly sharing sweets and tea. Livnell seemed especially delighted with the cookies, smiling as she mentioned that her baby seemed to like them too. Flustered, Daphne quickly explained they were from her favorite bakery. After a pause, Livnell gently asked how Daphne had been feeling. Daphne replied that she was doing much better now, but it was obvious her aunt wasn't just making small talk. Catching on quickly, Daphne told her outright she planned to break off her engagement with Roderick. And as for becoming a saint, she had already given up on that dream. And just to be clear, she had no intention of repeating something as foolish as trying to end her own life again. The effect was immediate. Relief washed over Livnell so visibly. That reaction was bigger than she expected, and it made Daphne pause and think. Roderick always acted cold toward her in private, yet in public, he was flawless. Even while carrying on an affair, not a single person suspected a thing. So why did Livnell and Sion seem to dislike him so much? Pretending her memory was still unreliable, Daphne carefully asked why her aunt had been so against the engagement in the first place. Livnell hesitated, clearly reluctant, but eventually admitted the truth. She had overheard Roderick speaking with his club members. He mocked Daphne, spoke of her with cruelty, like she was nothing more than a joke. Livnell had known then, marriage wouldn't change him. It would only trap Daphne in something worse. That's why she tried to stop it. Well, no surprise there. A cheater doesn't suddenly grow a conscience after saying, "I do." Daphne already knew that. People don't magically change just because a wedding ring gets involved. That kind of happy ending belongs in fairy tales, not reality. Still, hearing it confirmed lifted a weight off her chest. At least now, she wasn't walking away blindly. She thanked her aunt sincerely. Livnell, in turn, looked genuinely relieved, finally able to breathe now that Daphne had chosen to end things. Watching her, Daphne couldn't help but notice the details. Soft light brown hair, gentle eyes. There was something about her that felt small and warm, like a squirrel, honestly. But that only made it stranger. For someone who frequently stayed at the infirmary, her aunt looked far too fragile. And that question lingered, heavier than before. What exactly caused her miscarriage in the original story? And how did it lead, all the way to her death? Just then, a maid approached their table. Livnell smiled and mentioned it was time for her medicinal tea, the one her doctor had specially prescribed. She explained it was beneficial for pregnant women, and women's health in general. Curious, Daphne accepted a cup. The aroma hit her first, pleasant, soothing, and oddly familiar. Then she took a sip and froze. That taste, she knew it. Slowly, Daphne set the cup down, her expression tightening just a little. She asked carefully if this drink had truly been prescribed by Livnell's personal doctor. Livnell nodded without hesitation. The doctor had gone out of his way to acquire the tea from another country just for her. She'd been drinking it consistently ever since leaving the mansion, about 2 months now. Daphne's thoughts sharpened. If she recalled correctly, Livnell's health had started declining about a month ago. That was when Sion moved her to the infirmary. And yet, she never improved. If anything, she only got worse. And if this tea had been a constant during that time, then the problem wasn't her condition. It was the treatment. A chilling realization settled in. This tea might be the very thing that would cause Livnell's miscarriage. Keeping her composure, Daphne asked if she could meet the doctor, using her own health as an excuse. Just a quick checkup, nothing serious. Livnell agreed easily, mentioning that the doctor had recently moved into the estate as a resident physician. He was currently staying in the 3rd annex to monitor her condition. Meanwhile, the shameless doctor in question was enjoying himself far too much. Spencer couldn't be more satisfied with his current situation. Being a personal doctor to a noble household came with generous pay, far beyond what he used to earn. And who knew? If things went well, he might even earn a place within the temple someday. His future was looking bright. Then suddenly, a relentless pounding on his door made him jolt. Irritated, Spencer stormed over and yanked the door open, already snapping at whoever dared disturb him, only to freeze on the spot. Daphne stood right in front of him, the color drained from his face. His attitude flipped instantly as he stumbled over apologies, bowing his head in a panic. Daphne didn't waste time. She pressed him immediately about the special tea he had given to her aunt, and then asked him to prepare some for her as well. Spencer hesitated. He knew exactly what that tea was. If Daphne figured it out, he'd be in serious trouble. But refusing her? That might be even worse. From what he'd heard, Daphne wasn't exactly subtle. If she caused a scene, things could spiral fast. Besides, he reassured himself, she didn't seem sharp enough to notice anything anyway. Reluctantly, he handed over a small pouch. He instructed her to mix it with water or milk, adding that it would taste even better that way. Smooth lie, questionable judgment. The moment Spencer was out of sight, Daphne opened the pouch. She dipped a finger inside, tasted it, and her suspicion was confirmed. It was Adlai powder. In her previous life, this was common knowledge. While harmless in small amounts, it could be dangerous for pregnant women if consumed repeatedly or in larger doses. Enough exposure, and it could harm the fetus. And her pregnant aunt had been drinking it daily for 2 months. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. The fact that Spencer had access to such a rare form of Adlai, imported from another country, made one thing clear. He wasn't acting alone. Daphne didn't have solid proof yet, but Floa's name had already surfaced in her mind. And now she had no choice but to dig deeper and uncover the truth, before Levenel's fate plays out exactly as written. Cut to the annex, where the door suddenly bursts open and several maids storm in, irritation written all over their faces. Their patience? Completely gone. Without holding back, they start demanding why Sukiya thinks she can get away with slacking off like this. Sukiya, completely unfazed, lifts a basket packed with pastries like it's a peace offering. Apparently, Daphne had gone overboard and bought an absurd amount of desserts, so she figured the others might want to taste too. And just like that, temptation won. The maids grabbed the sweets without hesitation, casually calling it their fee for staying quiet. Since Sukiya rarely leaves the annex, this was her first real chance to chat with the main building staff. And of course, one of them couldn't resist sharing the latest and juiciest gossip. As it turns out, Floa had been harboring a one-sided crush on Lias for a long time, and she wasn't exactly subtle about it either. Every time she saw him, her feelings were practically written all over her face. Too bad Lias always responded with ice-cold indifference. And that kind of rejection, it doesn't just disappear, it festers. Which meant Floa might not hesitate to lash out, even if it meant hurting someone else. Not long after, the information reached Daphne, and suddenly, everything started connecting. Her poisoning incident, Livnel's suspicious treatment, Floa's unresolved obsession with Lias. Each piece fit together a little too perfectly. Daphne's eyes narrowed. If all of this really pointed back to Floa, then it was time to stop guessing. She'd set a trap and flush that little rat out into the open. Elsewhere, in a quieter room, Cian was with his wife, his voice gentle as he asked how she was feeling. Livnel offered a soft smile as she reassured him that the baby was growing well, and that, thanks to the treatment, she was doing fine too. But even as she spoke, her heart tightened, because Cian's expression told a different story. He looked worried, exhausted, and was clearly struggling to hold himself together. So Livnel gently told him not to worry about them. All he needed to do was stay strong, for both of them. Not long after, Daphne visited them, holding a tray with tea. Her uncle blinked in surprise when his niece casually suggested something unexpected. A family dinner that night in the main building. Everyone would be there, including Lias and the twins, making it a full gathering of the entire family. As Daphne handed him a cup, she mentioned it had been specially prepared for Livnel. She added that she had invited a special guest, so the staff would surely go all out for the evening. Oh, and one more thing. Since Livnel's condition was so unusual, perhaps it wouldn't hurt to seek a second opinion from another doctor. With that, Daphne turned and left as quickly as she came, dropping ideas like breadcrumbs and disappearing before anyone could question her too much. After she was gone, Cian relayed everything to his wife, still unsure whether attending the dinner was the right choice. Livnell was pleased. She reminded him that on the very day they returned, Daphne had been the first to reach out, inviting her to tea, sharing desserts, and showing her unexpected warmth. It was subtle but clear. Daphne had changed. Cian was suddenly struck by a realization. It had been so long since he had heard her call him uncle. Maybe something really had changed while they were away. Livnell smiled, her expression soft but hopeful. She suggested they go. After all, it had been a long time since the entire family had sat down together like this. His eyes grew wet as he nodded, squeezing her hand gently. If that's what she wanted, then of course they would go. Because right now, seeing her smile like that was everything. It didn't take long for the news to reach Floa. A family dinner with esteemed nobles attending. And somehow, she wasn't invited. That alone was enough to sour her mood. There hadn't been a proper banquet in the estate since Daphne's mother passed away. So to suddenly host one now. In Floa's mind, this wasn't just dinner. It was a calculated move. Lias must be trying to solidify his position as the ducal heir. With Cian and Livnell back, likely presenting them as healthy and stable, he could shut down any rumors before they even spread. Floa smirked to herself. Too bad Livnell's condition was only going to get worse. But then, another thought crept in. What if Lias planned to bring in a new mistress? Her expression darkened instantly. No, that wasn't happening. Not on her watch. Without wasting another second, she headed straight to Spencer's chambers, intent on checking the status of their plan. Spencer greeted her with confidence, assuring her that everything was proceeding exactly as instructed. Then, shifting his tone, he brought up his own concern. Once this was all over, he wanted guarantees, a secured position as a temple doctor, just as Floa had promised. Floa was clearly annoyed, but she still tossed him his advance payment. She reminded him coldly of his real task, making sure Livnell's child didn't survive. Of course, in her mind, there was zero chance this fool would ever set foot in the temple, no matter how well he performed. Their exchange was cut short when a maid rushed in, breathless, announcing that the party had already begun. That did not sit well with Floa. Not all the guests had even arrived, yet they'd already started. Fuming, she dragged Spencer along as they hurried toward the main building, still unable to understand why they hadn't received an invitation. But what truly set her off was being stopped at the entrance. 2 knights blocked their way without hesitation. Floa's irritation spiked. She pointed at Spencer, demanding an explanation. How could a resident doctor not be invited? And as for herself, there was no way they didn't know who she was. Right then, Daphne's calm voice cut through the tension. Floa turned immediately, wasting no time complaining that the guards refused to let them in. Daphne simply glanced at the knights and gave a small nod. They stepped aside at once. Ah, of course. Floa straightened, her confidence returning. Same old Daphne, naive and easy to handle. She even offered to enter together, as if nothing had happened. Daphne interrupted her. She couldn't come in because the party was canceled. All those invitations had been such a hassle, so Daphne decided to scrap it and just have a quiet dinner with family instead. Much simpler. And as much as they would love to include Floa, well, the knights had a point. She wasn't family. Floa blinked, clearly thrown off. That didn't make sense. No noble would casually ignore invitations from House Peregrine, unless this wasn't Lias's doing. Daphne smirked and asked the obvious question. How had Floa even known about the party? When Floa remained silent, Daphne continued, laying everything out. She knew Floa had planted a spy among the servants, someone who must have leaked the information. Unable to enter on her own after being reprimanded by Lias, Floa had brought Spencer along, assuming Livnell's doctor wouldn't be turned away. Smart, but not smart enough, because all it did was confirm their connection. And Daphne wasn't done yet. She exposed the rest of it, their little scheme, the so-called medicine, the Adlai tea slowly harming Livnell and putting both her and her unborn child at risk. As the air turned heavy, Daphne stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp. Floa had 2 choices. Confess everything to Lias herself, or Let Daphne personally escort her back to the imperial family she seemed so fond of. Either way, there was no walking out of this clean anymore. Faced with a choice, Floa didn't hesitate and chose denial. With a perfectly composed face, she dismissed everything as nonsense. Spencer? Just someone she cherished as her pupil. Adlai T? She had no idea what Daphne was talking about. Then, in a flawless performance, she turned to Spencer with a look of concern and asked if he had really given Levenell such harmful tea, calling his actions unforgivable. Wow, throwing him under the carriage and backing over him twice. Spencer snapped instantly. He fired back, telling her not to dump the blame on him when this entire plan was hers from the start. But Floa didn't back down. She insisted Daphne shouldn't listen to a commoner's words. After all, how could someone like him be trusted? That did it. In a burst of anger, he spilled everything. It was Floa who said Daphne would be better off dead, claiming she wasn't even worthy of the Peregrine name. And as for Livenell's child? Floa wanted it gone because it would interfere with Laius and the twins' future. Each word hit harder than the last, yet Floa kept denying it. Until the door opened. Laius and Cian stood there, having heard it all. At that moment, Floa was like a trapped rat with nowhere left to run. Before she could even attempt another excuse, cold steel pressed against her neck. Laius stood before her, sword steady, his voice low and deadly. One more lie, and she would die where she stood. That was all it took. Floa's strength gave out. Her knees buckled as she collapsed to the floor, trembling. Finally, she confessed everything. Even then, she tried to justify it, claiming she did it all for Laius. But his expression didn't change. Without hesitation, he ordered the knights to seize both Floa and Spencer. They would be imprisoned immediately. And if the imperial family or the temple came asking, the answer was simple. They had attempted to murder Daphne and endangered a pregnant woman and her unborn child. As the guards dragged Floa away, Daphne gave her a small, almost cheerful wave, smiling as she wished never to see her again. A generous amount of salt on Floa's wound. Floa's screams echoed down the halls as she disappeared from sight. Only the 3 members of the Peregrine family remained, watching the aftermath unfold. Laius stood frozen, the weight of everything crashing down on him. Too late, he realized the truth. Daphne, Livenell, and even the unborn child. All of them had been in danger because of him. Panic surged through him as he immediately ordered for a doctor to be called, desperate to check on Livenell. But Cian stopped him. Calmly, he explained that both his wife and their baby were safe, thanks to Daphne. She had insisted on consulting another doctor, which led them to the truth in time. Not only that, Daphne had provided a different tea, one actually safe for pregnant women. Thankfully, Livenell hadn't consumed the harmful tea long enough for irreversible damage. She would be all right. Relief hit like a wave. Cian, eyes brimming, took Daphne's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. But Daphne quickly waved it off. They could do the emotional speeches later because right now, she was starving. As if on cue, her stomach let out a loud, undeniable growl. Perfect timing. The twins also burst into agreement. Now they could finally have their happy family meal together. Soon after, Laius stepped into the imperial palace and requested an audience with the emperor. Emperor Curtison asked about Daphne and Livenell. Laius answered evenly. Both were safe now, and the child out of danger. A relief, but the tension in the room didn't ease. The emperor waved a hand, saying Laius was free to handle Floa and the doctor however he wished. But Laius didn't move on. Instead, he reminded the emperor of something important. Floa had always been loyal to the former empress, Hela. If he had wanted to act harshly, he could have done far worse long ago. But he didn't. His family chose restraint, and he expected that to be acknowledged. The emperor, clearly trying to settle things, offered to loosen the restrictions on magic stone shipments from the Peregrine territory. Laius shut it down immediately, saying it wasn't enough, and that answer lit a fuse. The emperor shot up from his throne, anger flaring as he demanded what kind of compensation Laius was really after. Laius met his gaze without hesitation. He wanted the poisoning case reopened. From the very beginning, he intended to find out whether Daphne had truly been at fault during the Empress's banquet, or if the truth had been buried. If only the Emperor had trusted Daphne back then, things wouldn't have spiraled to the point where she nearly died. So now it was only right to uncover what really happened. Even the Emperor understood. This wasn't just a simple reinvestigation. If the trail led back to his mother, if it proved hostility toward House Peregrine, then everything could fall apart. Laius already knew one thing for certain. Even if the truth came out, the Emperor would never put his own mother on trial. But trust? That was different. If doubt crept in, and suspicion grew between them, then Hela could lose the one thing she valued most, her son's trust. With no better option, the Emperor finally relented. He waved his hand, muttering that he hadn't realized Laius cared this much about his family. Permission granted. Laius bowed and took his leave, getting exactly what he came for. On his way out, he crossed paths with Hela. She greeted him with a graceful smile, casually mentioning she was hosting a tea gathering and inviting him to join. Laius declined without pause. Too much work. Even a short break for tea wasn't possible today. Now, tea gatherings were usually held in the palace gardens, on the opposite side. So why invite him there? Simple. She already knew something. Laius offered a light apology, adding that he wasn't particularly fond of flowers anyway, just like his father. A harmless comment on the surface, but it wasn't random. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that some small pests had been spotted around his estate lately, and that a few of his family members had fallen ill because of them. His gaze turned cold as he said there was no need for concern. He planned to deal with those pests personally. Anyone who dared threaten House Peregrine would pay for it. Every word landed exactly where it was meant to. Hela kept her smile, though it stiffened just a little. She apologized for taking his time, then gracefully excused herself, leaving with her attendants. The moment she stepped into her private chambers, a teacup shattered against the floor. Fury twisted her expression as she clenched her hands tightly. That look, that tone, Laius was just like his father. And that memory burned. The humiliation, the rejection. The moment Duke Peregrine told her his heart already belonged to someone else and asked her to stop sending flowers. That shame still lingered. This was supposed to be her perfect revenge. The fall of House Peregrine, carefully crafted over the years. And now, it was unraveling. Her thoughts raced. When did Laius figure it out? Did Floa say something she shouldn't have? No. If they had already learned everything from Floa, there would be no need to reopen the investigation. Which meant something else had changed. She recalled one of Floa's previous reports about Daphne's sudden change in behavior. If that was true, then years of planning could collapse because of a single unexpected shift. She couldn't block the reinvestigation, not without making the Emperor suspicious. But that didn't mean she was out of moves. Calling a maid, Hela gave her next order. Find a fallen noble. Someone with a title, but nothing left to their name. Preferably ruined by gambling. For her next scheme, a tragic love-driven story would do perfectly. After all, if one plan fails, she'll simply write a better one. News of the reinvestigation into the poisoning at the Empress's banquet spread quickly. And with it came one burning question. Would Daphne Peregrine finally be cleared of the accusation? As Lucielle read through the newspaper, the answer started to take shape. The case had been reopened for a reason. New evidence had surfaced, pointing toward the real culprit. Which meant this whole incident had been a setup from the very beginning. That realization stirred an old memory in him, how Hela had once persuaded the Emperor to send him away to the temple. Just thinking about it now, it felt all too familiar. This kind of scheme, it had her fingerprints all over it again. Still, this turn of events worked perfectly in his favor. If Daphne's name was cleared, then there would be nothing stopping them from meeting freely. His thoughts were cut off when something caught his eye. In the magic mirror, a familiar figure appeared. Daphne had just arrived at their shop. Lucielle's mood instantly lifted. It had been a while since he last saw her. Perfect timing. But Gale's voice broke in. "Master, do I really have to do this?" With a snap, the broomstick in his hands broke clean in half. That's how stressed he was. How was he supposed to pretend to be an archduke and negotiate with Daphne? Sure, magic could disguise his appearance and voice. But what about everything else? His mannerisms? His personality? That wasn't something you could fake on command. And since Daphne didn't even know Luciel and the sketchy shop owner were the same person, why not just meet her properly, introduce himself, then say he'd connect her with the Archduke for the medicine deal? With surprising honesty, Luciel admitted that introducing himself as a powerful and highly skilled tower master felt awkward, and having to hear Daphne talk about her first impression of him. Yeah, he'd rather avoid that entirely. Which is why Gale was perfect for the role. Without further discussion, Luciel tossed a cloak at his unfortunate subordinate and began giving instructions. Gale was to casually drop Luciel's name during the conversation and emphasize one key point. His authority as the Tower Master made everything completely legal. No temple interference. No restrictions on whatever medicine Daphne wanted to create. Gale looked like his soul had just clocked out. Too bad. Luciel's expression softened into something too gentle, never a good sign, as he warned Gale to make sure he succeeded before vanishing into thin air. And so the poor man silently vowed to quit this job someday. The second a knock echoed through the shop, Gale snapped into character. In one smooth motion, he activated the disguise cloak and greeted Daphne like a seasoned professional. Daphne lowered her hood, casually noting it had been a while since their last meeting. She handed over what she brought, the samples he requested, plus an improved version. One of them, she added, was an upgraded form of the same medicine from before. Gale nodded, then immediately blurted out that he'd been curious about its effects. But that didn't sound like Luciel at all. Panic crept in. Without realizing it, he wiped the sweat off his face using his very colorful handkerchief. Daphne tilted her head, eyeing him. Was he feeling hot? Caught, Gale quickly fumbled out an excuse. Something about adding more wood to the fire because of the cold weather lately. I need to end this fast before I mess up, Gale thought, nerves spiking. Before he could redirect, Daphne dropped something unexpected. She said she had already found the perfect person. That's why she came. Luciel's earlier friendly reminder, complete with the imaginary neck-slitting gesture, flashed through Gale's mind. Failure was not an option. Not if he valued his life. He quickly asked who she was referring to. Instead of answering directly, Daphne brought up the Archduke she had recently encountered. She mentioned hearing about his rare illness and asked if Gale knew anything about it. Now he was confused. Wasn't he supposed to be the one promoting Luciel? Why was she bringing him up first? Still, he answered carefully. The Archduke's condition had no known cure. He'd been treated at the temple since childhood, but nothing had worked. Even as he spoke, Gale couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested. Clearing his throat, he added that the Archduke had lived in isolation for a long time. That kind of life made him a little different from others. Now, what Gale wanted to say was, terrible personality, enjoys hanging people upside down. Basically a demon. But obviously, that would ruin everything. So instead, he went with, by normal standards, the Archduke might seem a little lacking. He wasn't very familiar with emotions like affection or love. And Daphne? She completely bought it. In fact, she looked like she was about to cry. In her mind, Luciel transformed completely. A kind, gentle man, almost angelic, who had never treated her unfairly despite her reputation. Because of his unstable magic, he had grown up separated from his family, enduring years of loneliness. A man who didn't understand affection, yet quietly longed for it. Daphne felt it hit close to home. She understood that emptiness, that quiet craving for warmth. So to her, Luciel wasn't just an archduke. He was someone unloved, fragile, and fated to die young. Trying to regain control, Gale asked why she was bringing all of this up, ready to cut the conversation short if needed. Only to realize her actual goal. She wanted to sell her medicine through the Archduke. Gale flipped instantly. His tone changed so fast it could have caused whiplash. Of course she could trust the Archduke. In fact, he highly recommended him. If she wanted, he could even arrange a meeting. But Daphne refused immediately. Completely unaware of the truth, Daphne had already made up her mind. There was no way she would involve someone as innocent and naive as Luciel with a dangerous mastermind. His face alone had already fooled her enough. Besides, she only came here because of the poison incident. Once this deal was done, she planned to cut ties, with the shady shop owner and with Luciel too. She needed to break away from the original storyline completely with no loose ends. Daphne explained that her reputation made things complicated. People already avoided her, so approaching the Archduke through someone else might only raise suspicion. She had to move carefully. For now, she suggested considering a non-exclusive contract later. First, she wanted to establish her own sales independently. With that said, she turned and walked toward the exit and paused. Glancing back, she mentioned that he seemed unwell earlier, especially since he didn't escort her like he usually did. So, in a softer tone, she suggested he use the last bottle of medicine for himself. With that, Daphne finally left the shop. Gale practically collapsed onto the couch the moment he tore off his disguise, relief washing over him like he had just survived a battlefield. Finally, peace, for about 2 seconds, because Luciel appeared out of nowhere, already asking for an update. Gale nearly had a heart attack. The poor, overworked man begged him not to do that again. His heart wasn't built for surprise attacks like this. Luciel only laughed, offering a light apology. He admitted he was just too curious to wait, since he hadn't been eavesdropping the whole time. Anyway, Gale got straight to reporting. He managed to secure 5 bottles of the medicine, including the improved version. Daphne also mentioned she might consider a contract later, depending on how her exclusive sales turn out. Luciel listened, then frowned slightly. Was that all? Gale caught that look immediately. Ah, so that's what he was waiting for. So he added the part Luciel clearly cared about. Daphne wanted to make a deal. Not with the shop, but with the Archduke. Luciel's expression lit up, a wide grin spreading across his face. Even Gale blinked twice. That was a dangerously pleased look. Without hesitation, Luciel turned and headed straight for the door, clearly ready to chase after her. Gale quickly stopped him. There was just one small problem. Daphne had already said she'd arrange her own chance encounter with the Archduke. She wasn't planning to go through them. In short, she already left. Gale, trying to steer things back on track, suggested they examine the medicine samples first. If everything checked out, and Luciel could figure out the ingredients, then they wouldn't need to rely on her anymore. He made a good point. And yet, Luciel didn't seem fully on board with that idea. If anything, a small part of him looked like he didn't want things to be that simple. Without another word, he took the improved version and drank the whole thing in one go. The moment he finished, a slow smirk appeared. Daphne had altered the formula, lowering both the concentration and the effect. She clearly wasn't about to hand over the real deal without securing a proper contract first. Luciel exhaled softly, amused. How could he not be intrigued by someone like that? But at the same time, it felt a little unfair. Why was he the only one feeling this interested? That wouldn't do. If he was this invested, then Daphne should be too. With a snap of his fingers, his appearance shifted into his usual Archduke style. Now, with one clear goal in mind, he planned to make the most of their next chance encounter. At the Rose Bakery, Daphne sat alone at a quiet table, waiting. She had told herself she'd find a way to accidentally run into Luciel. But in reality, this was the only place she could think of. Not exactly a genius plan, but hey, it was something. As she waited, a group of noble ladies nearby caught her attention. They were loudly gossiping. Apparently, the Archduke frequented this bakery, and according to them, he was so angelically handsome that just looking at him made them want to drop to their knees and pray. The man had a reputation for being an angel everywhere, except in front of his own subordinates. Then, the topic shifted to the latest scandal involving Floa. They couldn't believe it. The same woman people called the angel at the altar, involved in something as vile as poisoning? Impossible. One of them suggested that maybe Floa was covering for someone else. After all, she had once been Daphne's personal tutor. Maybe she simply took the blame for her former student. The others quickly agreed that Floa wouldn't do something like that. Daphne sat there listening, so close to flipping the entire table. Honestly, her reputation was already in ruins. What difference would it even make? Just then, a sudden gust of wind swept through their table. In the next second, tea spilled right onto the gossiping ladies. Like a tiny tornado had chosen that exact table as its target. As if on perfect cue, Lucielle appeared out of nowhere and casually asked about her coffee preference, like nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. Daphne nearly said his name out loud, but he quickly signaled her to stay quiet. Drawing attention here would only cause chaos. Instead, he leaned in slightly and suggested something else. She could call him Winter, his middle name. That caught her off guard. Usually, middle names were reserved for people close to someone, like friends or lovers. So, was she really allowed to use it? It felt a little strange, but at the same time, Winter suited him perfectly. When she finally said it, he smiled, and somehow he looked even more attractive than the last time she saw him. Lucielle mentioned how nice the weather was, adding that he hadn't been out much lately. Daphne immediately picked up on that. If he rarely left his home, then his condition must have been worse than she thought. So, without overthinking it, she invited him to join her. After all, it was a perfect day to sit down, relax, and share a cup of tea with someone. As they sat across from each other, quietly enjoying their drinks, Daphne stole a glance at Lucielle. On the outside, he looked perfectly fine. Healthy, composed, almost untouchable. But she knew better. His magic reflux was no joke. And now she had a problem. How was she supposed to bring up the medicine? Talking business, contracts, deals, with someone who looked this harmless? It felt wrong. Her thoughts were cut short when Lucielle suddenly started coughing, violently. Daphne shot up from her seat, completely startled. "Are you okay?" Once his very convincing coughing fit ended, Lucielle apologized, brushing it off as a sudden flare-up. Daphne stared at him and froze, because instead of looking like someone on the verge of collapse, he looked way too hot and sexy. Slightly flushed, a little breathless, sweat catching the light. After mentally scolding herself, she listened as Lucielle explained that the Empire's medicine had never worked for him. If something actually did, it would mean everything. Daphne felt awful. Here she was, thinking about deals and contracts, while he was clearly suffering. Forget business. Right now she just wanted to help. A little embarrassed, she admitted that she had some knowledge in making medicine. She understood it was hard to trust someone he barely knew, but she promised her medicine worked. Lucielle didn't hesitate to take it. For a moment, he looked like someone who would accept anything she gave him, even if it was poison instead of medicine. Trust level dangerously high. Then came another coughing fit. Daphne's heart dropped. He looked like he was genuinely struggling now, like he might actually collapse at any moment. But in reality, he's just grinding charm points, and she doesn't even realize she's the main quest. Daphne quickly handed him the medicine, telling him to drink it all and report any strange reactions. Lucielle obeyed immediately. Then, after a moment, he admitted he felt a little strange. That was all it took. Daphne leaned in, closing the distance, and placed a hand on his forehead to check his temperature. No fever. But then why was his face still flushed? She looked into his eyes, trying to figure it out. Lucielle's heart started racing far too fast, his face turning even redder under her gaze. Daphne stiffened. His temperature felt like it was rising. Something was definitely wrong. Without hesitation, she decided to call a doctor. These side effects were not normal. But Lucielle gently stopped her. He explained that he was just surprised. He had never taken a medicine that worked this quickly before. She let out a quiet breath of relief. So it wasn't a bad reaction after all. Once things settled, she returned to her seat, her expression turning serious. There was something she needed to say. She told Lucielle she wanted to make him an offer. She knew he had been suffering from his illness for a long time, and now that her medicine proved effective, she could supply it to him regularly. And if meeting her directly was inconvenient, she was even willing to hand over the formula. Lucielle thanked her sincerely, and for a brief moment, Daphne found herself thinking, how do you say no to someone who looks like that? On top of that, There was no better face to represent her product than Luciel himself. Daphne added that aside from the medicine working, Luciel had helped her before, so now she wanted to return the favor. The moment he accepted, her face lit up instantly. But Luciel wasn't done. In return, he asked if there was anything he could do for her. Was her luck really turning around this fast? Luciel smiled softly, and then, wait, did he just think she was cute? Wasn't that the kind of line straight out of a cheesy romance novel? Luciel, the ever-composed Archduke, was now dealing with a full-blown internal meltdown. Completely oblivious to his dilemma, Daphne casually brought up her next big idea. She wanted to open a small salon. Luciel was confused, to say the least. A salon? With her not-so-simple reputation? Hiring even a single employee sounded like a disaster waiting to happen. But Daphne? She didn't look the least bit concerned. She was dead set on turning this into something extraordinary. A healing salon. At the time, the Crown Prince was away dealing with monster hunts, and the atmosphere in the Empire felt slightly tense. People were uneasy, whether they admitted it or not. Daphne, however, saw an opening. If they leaned into that mood and built a concept around the legendary goddess of peace, promising comfort for both body and mind, it could attract massive attention. Her plan was to create a healing therapy cafe. A place where soft music gently filled the air, tea was served with quiet care, and guests could retreat into private rooms for massages or calming treatments. And the most important part of any therapy wasn't the technique, it was the bed, warm, soft, and ridiculously comfortable. One of the few things she loved from her past life. Because in this world, beds were honestly disappointing, hard to warm up, and even worse at keeping that warmth. Which led to her breakthrough idea: electric heating pads. A winter essential back in Korea and commonly used in Oriental medicine clinics. Patients would lie down for treatment and end up dozing off without fail. If she could recreate that exact experience here, nobles wouldn't just visit, they'd keep coming back. And she wasn't done stacking advantages. If she sold her medicine directly in the salon, its popularity would skyrocket. Add in membership options for clients who wanted specific services, and suddenly this small salon started looking like a guaranteed gold mine. That's when she made her request. Daphne asked Luciel for a fire mage, someone capable of charging thin mana stones for heated beds, along with small palm-sized heating tools. Since Luciel was the tower master, she was hoping he could make it happen. Luciel already considered her sharp, but after hearing all that, she somehow became even more impressive. Still, he gave her a reality check. Magical tools weren't cheap to produce. Tower mages had independent authority, which meant their services cost more than ordinary mages. And fire mages? They were the most in demand of all, meaning the highest fees. Daphne simply smirked, completely unfazed. In regions buried in snow or battered by constant coastal winds, portable heating tools would sell like crazy. And if they made them small and light enough to attach to clothing, sales wouldn't just rise, they'd explode. Every winter, nobles from the capital would be lining up to buy them. Then she made another move, bold, but calculated. She asked if she could sell her medicine under Luciel's name. In return, she'd offer him a bigger share of the profits later. And if he agreed to everything she proposed today, she'd include a special condition. Regardless of success or failure, the medicine would be sold exclusively under his name. Luciel let out a low chuckle, clearly entertained. He liked this deal. Curious, he asked where she intended to open this brilliant salon of hers. Daphne hesitated. She hadn't decided yet. Maybe somewhere famous for retreats, somewhere peaceful. Honestly, she just wanted to live a life that had nothing to do with the original story anymore. That answer made Luciel's expression turn serious. He asked if she planned to move there as well. She immediately shook her head. No, not at all. Luciel felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. Daphne still had one last very important concern. Who on earth was going to manage the place? Luciel caught on immediately. Of course, that was the problem. So he asked her outright if she needed someone to run the business. But the moment Daphne mentioned she was thinking of hiring a man, preferably someone strong and well-built, cue the dramatic gust of wind out of nowhere. Again. Luciel's expression didn't change. but his voice turned suspiciously smooth. He mentioned that he just so happened to know the perfect candidate, someone who had recently become available. Apparently, the man's impressive physique made it difficult for him to find suitable work. But no worries. Luciel personally guaranteed that this person would follow orders perfectly. At that exact moment, Gale suddenly felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had no idea why. Poor guy didn't realize he'd just been hired to a new job without even being consulted. Before heading home, Daphne decided to go inside the bakery shop to pick up something for her aunt. One of the staff quickly approached, but instead of a warm welcome, his eyes immediately scanned Daphne from head to toe. Then came the blunt suggestion. The shop was quite expensive, he said, so perhaps she'd be more interested in the pre-packed desserts near the counter. They were made yesterday, but supposedly tasted just as good as the fresh ones. Right, totally convincing. Just then, Liz Caffaroel walked in with her friends, chatting loudly about how Roderick had gone out of his way to obtain rare holy water from the temple just for her. The staff member's attention snapped instantly. A clear big spender had arrived. Without a second thought, he rushed over to attend to Liz, completely abandoning Daphne. Liz went on about how being bedridden for weeks had made her crave sweets more than anything. At one point, she casually handed her bag to another lady beside her, claiming her arm was sore, though the way she did it made it feel less like a request and more like an order. Naturally, the conversation drifted to their favorite topic. It was Daphne. They noted how quiet she'd been lately, especially with her still under probation. Then, they all agreed on one thing. The Peregrine family should have given up on her a long time ago. Daphne, for her part, had no intention of letting their petty chatter get to her. She was ready to leave with Luciel and ignore the whole thing, until Liz pushed it too far. With a scoff, Liz declared that if it were up to her, she wouldn't have stopped at probation. She would have erased Daphne from the family registry entirely. She went on, complaining that Daphne had almost killed her, yet her father let it slide before she could even protest. And just to top it off, she bragged that once she got home, she'd make sure Daphne wouldn't get away with something so lenient ever again. Daphne had only just managed to mend things with her uncle, and here this woman was, trying to tear it all apart again. Enough was enough. So Daphne grabbed a plate and let it crash onto the floor. The sharp sound cut through the room, instantly drawing every eye toward her. With a perfectly calm expression, she offered a sarcastic apology, saying she simply had to interrupt so she could join their absolutely fascinating conversation. The lady's face flushed with anger. She demanded to know who this rude woman thought she was, daring to speak to her like that. Right on cue, Luciel casually glanced toward the door. It swung open as a gust of wind rushed inside, as dramatic as ever. The sudden gust knocked Daphne's hood back, revealing her face to everyone present. Her expression changed instantly. Liz lowered her head in a hurry, claiming she had no idea Daphne was there. Daphne agreed coolly, because if Liz had known and still dared to talk about removing her from the Duke's registry, well, that would have been practically signing her own death warrant. Still unwilling to lose face, Liz switched tactics. Her voice trembled, and suddenly she looked like the victim. She reminded Daphne that she had repeatedly said there was nothing between her and Roderick. Yet Daphne refused to believe her, and even went so far as to poison her. It had taken weeks for her to recover. Did Daphne really hate her that much? To seal the performance, she even forced out a few tears. Tilting her head slightly, Daphne asked, almost innocently, if Liz had already fully recovered. She quickly responded that she hadn't, not completely. She claimed the incident had damaged her teeth, and she was still receiving treatment. Interesting. For someone supposedly suffering from tooth pain, she had picked out some very hard-looking cookies. Caught off guard, Liz hurriedly explained that they were gifts for her family. She had no intention of eating them herself. Daphne's lips curved into a faint smirk. "That's a problem," she said lightly. "It seems you've been deceived." She then pointed toward one of her companions, the lady holding a bag, and asked if she had mentioned earlier that Roderick had brought holy water from the temple for Liz. The lady nodded quickly, saying she had only repeated what Liz told them. Now all eyes turned back to Liz. Daphne's gaze sharpened as she explained that holy water from the temple was incredibly rare, so rare that even the imperial family couldn't obtain it easily. So if Liz had truly used it, and was still suffering, then something didn't add up, which meant only one thing. She'd been scammed. Liz stiffened. That wasn't what she meant. She quickly tried to backtrack. Then, with forced indignation, she turned to her friends and demanded to know when she had ever said Roderick actually gave her holy water. She insisted she had only said he tried to get it. Unfortunately for her, both companions immediately disagreed. They clearly remembered her saying he did get it. So in the end, Liz wasn't some tragic victim, just a rather pitiful liar who never even got the holy water in the first place. But if she hadn't received holy water, then how had she recovered so quickly? The Marquis Caffarel had claimed his daughter was on the brink of death from poison. Because of that, House Peregrine had been forced to comply with the former Empress's demand, taking Floa into their estate and paying a massive compensation. Yet the lady standing here now looked perfectly fine, which led Daphne to a single unsettling question. Was Liz ever poisoned at all? Meanwhile, Liz quickly apologized, brushing everything off as a misunderstanding. Daphne didn't let it slide. Calm but cutting, she pointed out that Liz had a habit of twisting stories until everyone else ended up confused, and she certainly hadn't forgotten that little comment about removing someone from the family registry. Her smile stiffened. Liz offered another apology for bringing it up, then quickly made her exit. Inside, Daphne was internally screaming that high society was terrifying, but on the outside, her expression stayed sharp enough to scare off an entire room. It worked. One by one, the remaining customers hurried out of the bakery, clearly deciding their peace of mind was more important than pastries. In no time, the place was nearly empty. Luciel, of course, didn't forget about the employee who had tried to slip away earlier. He caught the man with ease, then turned to Daphne and casually asked if he had done a good job. With that soft smile on his face, he looked like a puppy waiting for approval. Snapping herself back to reality, Daphne coolly asked what should be done with employees who discriminate against customers, and then try to run when things go wrong. She also added that the shop's management was clearly lacking, a remark that landed far sharper than intended, right on Luciel. And so, he twisted the employee's arm just enough to make a point and assured Daphne not to worry. Something told him this place would be implementing new policies very soon. Few minutes later, the head chef stormed out of the kitchen, demanding to know where all his customers had gone. Daphne calmly asked if he was the owner. He clarified that he was the one in charge, and immediately apologized for the trouble caused by his staff. Daphne wasn't interested in leaving behind only a villainous causing chaos impression after emptying the shop, so she decided to show a bit of goodwill. She explained that she had only intended to place an order, but the staff had been rude from the start. The chef quickly offered to take her order personally. Daphne stepped forward, glanced at the display, and pointed at everything. Then instructed him to send all the desserts to the Peregrine Manor. But the real highlight? The very same rude employee would be the one packing and delivering the order. With that settled, Daphne turned to Luciel and said it was time to leave. He adjusted his hood and gave the head chef a small, unsettling smile, one that sent an immediate chill down the man's spine. As they stepped out, Daphne casually took Luciel's hand and told him to come along. A warm smile spread across his face. To the public, Luciel was known as the Archduke cast out of the imperial family, the man who rose to become the Tower Master. But behind the curtain, he owned the underground shop and was the true owner of the Rose Bakery. Now the question was, why would someone like him run a dessert shop? Simple. The aristocrats who came and went weren't just customers. They were walking vaults of information. So technically, the staff's behavior toward Daphne, judging her at a glance, fit the shop's hidden purpose. Filtering people, observing reactions, it all had its use. Still, watching Daphne effortlessly shut down both the rude employee and those gossiping nobles? Yeah, she was definitely far from ordinary. When they arrived at the carriage station, Daphne let out a small sigh and apologized for dragging him into all that chaos earlier. Luciel shook his head immediately. If anything, he should be the one apologizing. He hadn't been much help. He was just standing there. She disagreed right away. She pointed out that he did help, especially when he stopped that employee from slipping away. That made him pause. Come to think of it, he had also grabbed Daphne's ex before, hadn't he? Which was strange. because he hated physical contact. And yet, ever since meeting her, he kept doing things he normally wouldn't. Even more confusing, he couldn't sense other people's emotions like he usually could. His focus had narrowed down to one thing: how to make Daphne happy. When Daphne lightly scolded him for grabbing people so suddenly, warning him that he might run into someone dangerous next time, Luciel misunderstood completely. To him, it sounded like she saw him as weak, socially awkward, and completely unfit to be seen in any romantic light. He thought he had made some kind of progress between them, but now it felt like he was stuck at the starting line. He was the only one carrying these feelings. Letting her go like this didn't sit right with him at all. So he apologized again for making her worry. With a slightly troubled expression, he admitted that if he ended up in the same situation again, he might just mess things up the same way. Then he used everything he had. That unfairly handsome face. A faint breeze stirred by his magic. A carefully timed question. Am I really that clueless? It was a full-on face card attack. Instead of getting flustered, Daphne unintentionally outdid him. Calmly, she advised him to take things one step at a time and figure them out slowly. She even promised to teach him whatever he needed to know. Then she smiled and said goodbye. That was the real finishing blow. Luciel stood there, completely overwhelmed. The familiar sweet scent around her, the warmth of her presence, the way his heart refused to calm down. He knew one thing for sure: if he got any closer right now, something dangerous might happen. So, for once, he chose to step back. But this wasn't the end. As soon as he returned, Luciel made a decision. He would finally read those ridiculous books Gale had been pushing on him. The romance novels he had always dismissed as nonsense. Maybe, just maybe, they held the answer to whatever this feeling was. The moment Daphne was out of sight, Luciel pulled out a communication crystal and contacted Gale. He gave a very specific order. Pick out the best-selling romance novels, the ones where the protagonist's heart starts acting strangely. He also told Gale to prepare for a transfer. A better position under a better boss. Exactly what Gale had always wanted. Gale had no clue what was happening, but his instinct screamed, agree now but ask never. Protect his neck, worry about everything else later.